Chapter 429. Chu Yuxian waved his fan proudly and felt honored. The people in the attic of the stone house were also sighing in admiration, especially the Tangs, who also felt honored. Some said that there had never been such a young calligrapher in the world. Some said that Mr. Ning was the best calligrapher in the past 1,000 years. Some said that the flower-blooming calligraphy was the best semi-cursive calligraphy. And some said that the chicken soup calligraphy was the best cursive calligraphy. Hearing these comments, Ning Ke felt uncomfortable all over. He was indeed a thick-skinned person, and he had always been very confident in his calligraphy. However, calligraphy was his true love, and he knew that he was not worthy of such an exaggerated evaluation, so he could not help but feel a little uneasy. He knew that his calligraphy was good, and could even be said to be very good. In today's world it was definitely top-notch. However, if it was not for the coincidence that the young man had written flower blooming on the shore in the imperial study, and the emperor's fanatical love, and then Master Yen Sei in the academy, even if his calligraphy was praised by the calligraphers, he would not have the status he had today. He thought back to the days when the old brush pen shop's calligraphy hung on the wall of Cha, and city was met with disdain during the spring rain. There were no customers for several days, and only Chao Xiaoshu stood outside the door with an umbrella, smiling. He knew very well that the so-called reputation was mostly attached, like the makeup on a woman's face. However, no matter how clear-headed Ning Ke was and how calm he was after his self-reflection, the officials and nobles in the attic of the stone house could no longer remain clear-headed and calm after hearing Zhong Li's simple words. The seemingly simple calligraphy sections were carefully sent to the stage by the most popular courtesan after Lu Shui from the House of Red Sleeves. Then, after rounds of intense bidding, they found new owners. Hearing the increasing amount of money, Ning Ke quickly calculated how much he could get. He realized that as long as he did not lose the chicken soup calligraphy, he should be able to satisfy his needs. He could not help but smile, and looked forward to Lord Wang spending a lot of money later. As long as his reputation could earn him money, he could not be bothered with how fake his reputation was. The so-called shame and uneasiness disappeared in an instant. Chu Yuxian secretly glanced at his expression, and felt that his smile was a little strange. He could not help but shiver and asked in a low voice, "What are you going to do? Which one do you want to buy? Chicken soup calligraphy?" He steeled his heart and said with a trembling voice, "I brought 50,000 taels of silver today." Ning Ke was shocked. He looked at him and asked, 50,000 taels of silver? What are you going to do with so much silver? Chu Yuxian said, "Father gave it to me." Ning Ke was even more surprised and said, "Your father is really going to buy it? Don't, I'll just write a few paintings for him, and he'll just give me a few thousand taels of silver." Chu Yuxian thought that he was being polite and said with a bitter face, "I only found out later that my family had sold half of their property so that I could enter the academy. Now I really don't have any more money." Ning Ke said angrily, "How can a calligraphy section be sold for 100,000 taels of silver in the world? No matter how good the ink is, it's not made of gold. No matter how good the Huangzhou bud paper is, it's not made of jade." In the past, Wang Shang of calligraphy's most famous night writing preface was only sold for 8,000 taels of silver. "Do you think I'm a god?" At this moment, he naturally did not know that the seller, Zhong Li, who was standing on the platform, had estimated the chicken soup calligraphy to be sold at a total of 30,000 taels of silver. The beautiful woman from the House of Red Sleeves carried the agarwood table, and slowly walked up to the platform. She was extremely beautiful and made people forget about her. She walked like a willow tree on a lake. However, no one in the attic looked at her. Instead, they looked at the note on the wooden table. Of course, the note had been carefully framed by the appraisal masters in Stone House. It was not exaggerated, but it added a sense of wonder. However, a note was still a note. It was just that in the eyes of the people, this note was no longer a note. It was a large sum of money or a small piece of land. The beautiful woman clearly sensed that no one in Stone House was paying attention to her. They were only looking at the section she was holding. However, she did not show any annoyance or sadness. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly. Compared to her previous elegant and gentle demeanor, she seemed incomparably proud. This was because the entire Chang and city knew about the relationship between Ning Ke and the House of Red Sleeves. This legendary calligraphy section was written by Ning Ke when he was drunk in the House of Red Sleeves. She was a girl from the House of Red Sleeves. Of course she had reason to be proud. It was quiet in the attic. Only the sound of the willow tree on the lake could be heard. Then a few slightly heavy breathing sounds could be faintly heard. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the calligraphy section on the wooden table. Everyone knew the origin and reputation of this chicken soup calligraphy, as well as the legend related to it. In advance, they knew that the last of the 7 calligraphy pieces of the old brush pen shop was the chicken soup calligraphy. However, at this moment they finally saw the authentic chicken soup calligraphy, and they still could not hide their shock. The silence continued. Compared to the intense bidding of the previous 6 calligraphy sections, the silence now was unusually strange. It seemed that everyone was waiting for something. The seller, Zhongli, stood on the platform with a calm expression. He did not say a word. He did not introduce the chicken soup calligraphy, nor did he ask the previous guests for their opinion. He let the silence continue to ferment. He was not worried about the awkward silence at all. Ning Ke had never seen such a scene. He was a little worried. He was worried that the awkward silence would last too long. He was worried that the chicken soup calligraphy would not be able to sell for a high price. He had paid a great price to make up for Grand Secretary Wang's hurt feelings. Chu Yuxian had vaguely guessed Ning Ke's intention. He also guessed that the theft at the old brush pen shop was purely a rumor. He asked in a low voice, "Should I try to bid first?" Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "Let's wait for a while. Even if others don't say anything, the steward of Grand Secretary Wang's mansion will definitely bid." He thought of something and said with a frown, "I'm just worried that His Majesty has found out about this. The palace has informed the outside world, so no one dares to bid." Chu Yuxian smiled and said, "You don't have to worry about this. I heard from Jin Wucai in the academy yesterday that His Majesty did mention about today's auction after the court meeting. He said that it was related to theft and asked the imperial court to pay attention to the situation. However, Grand Secretary Wang reprimanded him." Ning Ke only then knew that there was such a story. He could not help but laugh. His Majesty wants to find a way to sneak my things into the palace. He doesn't even think about whether the officials will be happy about it. Chu Yuxian said, "Yes, and I heard that Grand Secretary Wang and Old Chancellor made things difficult at the same time. In the end, they forced His Majesty to promise not to use the palace treasury to buy the calligraphy." Hearing this, Ning Ke felt even more gratified. Chu Yuxian said again, "But I heard that Grand Secretary Wang's mansion has said that whoever dares to snatch the chicken soup calligraphy will be against Grand Secretary Wang. Now that everyone is so quiet and no one has bid, it must be because of this." Hearing this, Ning Ke was furious. He said angrily, "This old man, I have already given him so many things, and he still dares to play this trick on me. Later, when his steward bids, if no one bids, you will bring it up for me." After a long period of silence, a voice finally rang out in the pavilion of Stone House. The voice came from the best bamboo pavilion on the east side of the 3rd floor. Everyone knew that the steward of Grand Secretary Wang was sitting in that bamboo pavilion. The steward's voice was calm, but the price he shouted was shocking. 10,000 taels. The entire pavilion was shocked, and then the entire pavilion fell silent. Although everyone had vaguely guessed that this chicken soup calligraphy would definitely be sold at a shocking price today, no one had expected that the first bid had already surpassed the final price of the Master of Calligraphy's night preface. It had set a new record for calligraphy auctions. Ning Ke's body leaned forward slightly. When he heard the voice, he immediately relaxed and leaned back in his chair. He thought to himself that Grand Secretary Wang was quite kind. Even if no one else bid against him, he probably had enough money in his hands. Grand Secretary Wang was a senior statesman of the Tang Empire for 3 dynasties. Even Princely Peiyan had to bow to him when he entered the imperial court. Such a big shot had announced in advance, and now he bid such a high price with great sincerity. All of a sudden, the building became quiet, and it seemed that no one wanted to compete with him. Ning Ke thought so too. Then he wondered if he should ask Chu Yuxian to raise the price of the chicken soup calligraphy. Even if he did not raise it by too much, It would still be a good thing to have 2 or 3,000 taels of silver. Zhongli, who was on the stage, looked at the pavilion on the third floor with a calm smile. He repeated the bid from the Grand Secretary mansion. From his expression, it seemed that only he was certain that this was not the final price. Zhongli seemed to be waiting for something. As expected, just when everyone thought that the calligraphy auction was coming to an end, a voice rang out in a pavilion on the west side of the third floor of Stone House. 15,000 taels of silver. The entire pavilion was shocked again, and then the entire pavilion fell silent again. Chu Yuxian was so nervous that he felt a little hot. He kept fanning himself and walked out of the pavilion. He wanted to see clearly who dared to bid against Grand Secretary Wang. Ning Kei's mood improved. Even though Stone House had the responsibility to protect the identity and privacy of the bidders, and there were curtains made of bamboo in front of the pavilion to cover the movements inside, this was Chong, and after all, there were only a few people who could afford to enter Stone House with such status. Not long after, the identity of the bidder on the west side of the third floor was found out. Immediately, there was a lot of discussion in the pavilion. It's a royal merchant from the South Jin Kingdom who came to Chong, and to buy. Chu Yuxian panted as he walked back to his room. He wiped his sweat as he reported what he had just heard. He's actually from the South Jin Kingdom? Ning Kei was a little shocked. Even though his calligraphy was famous in the world, the South Jin Kingdom had always been hostile to the Tang Empire. The people from the South Jin Kingdom must have looked down on him, a Tang calligrapher. Why would they choose such an occasion to buy his calligraphy? One must know that this was equivalent to raising the prestige of the Tang Empire. Chu Yuxian said, I heard that the royal merchant from the South Jin Kingdom works for the Crown Prince. Ning Kei was even more shocked. After thinking for a while, he asked hesitantly, the Crown Prince of the South Jin Kingdom does not like men, right? I'm going to walk the dog first. The third chapter will probably come out later. There seems to be something wrong with the dog's eyes. I may take it to see a doctor tomorrow. I'll report to everyone first. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 430. The South Jin royal merchant in the West Pavilion on the third floor was willing to offend the bigwigs of the Tang Empire to participate in the bidding for the chicken soup calligraphy. This could only be the will of the Crown Prince behind the royal merchant. As the future emperor of the South Jin Kingdom, who was the most hostile to the Tang Empire, he was willing to spend a large sum of money to purchase the chicken soup calligraphy to make a name for Ning Quebec. Other than the fact that he was crazy, Ning Kei could not understand why. In the end, his train of thought deviated from the right path and entered the realm of evil. Chu Yuxian did not know that Ning Kei's question was full of hidden meanings. He replied, the South Jin Kingdom Crown Prince is known for being lecherous. How would he be interested in men? I have never heard of him liking calligraphy. Just as the two of them were conversing, the bidding for the chicken soup calligraphy in Stone Residence became more and more intense. There were still only two parties bidding, the steward of the Grand Secretary's mansion and the royal merchant from the South Jin Kingdom. But with just the two of them bidding, sparks flew in all directions. Ning Kei had long forgotten why the Crown Prince of South Jin Kingdom wanted to buy the chicken soup stickers as he listened to the increasing bids and the increasing amount of money. He was very satisfied. Not long after, the price of the chicken soup calligraphy rose to 18,000 taels of silver. The sound of curtains being drawn could be heard from the third floor. The butler of Grand Secretary Wang's mansion walked out with a sullen face. He stood by the railing and looked in the direction of the West Pavilion. He sneered and said, the Tang Empire has always convinced people with reason and virtue. This is Chang'an. I will not bully you people from the South Jin Kingdom. The bamboo curtain of the West Pavilion was lifted, and a slightly plump middle-aged merchant with a ruddy complexion slowly walked out. He was dressed in a brocade robe with a jade pendant on his waist. He had an extraordinary bearing. He looked at the chief steward and said, I have an important mission, so I don't dare to give up easily. Please forgive me, chief steward. The price had been shouted, and the harsh words had been spoken. What followed was naturally a repeat of the previous bidding process. Although none of the parties suddenly increased the price by too much as time passed, the price of the chicken soup calligraphy on the stage gradually increased to a jaw-dropping level. 31,000 taels of silver, 32,000 taels of silver, 33,000 taels of silver. The chief steward of the Grand Secretary's mansion looked gloomy as he stared at the South Jean merchant in the West Pavilion and bid 33,000 taels of silver. With the Grand Secretary's seniority as a senior statesman of 3 dynasties, no matter how strict the laws of the Tang Empire were, it could not stop the riches hidden in his mansion. 30,000 taels of silver was indeed a lot, but it would not frighten the chief steward. However, everyone knew that he was backed by Grand Secretary Wang. A courtier spending 10,000 taels of silver on a section of calligraphy would definitely cause some discussion. Therefore, he wanted to see the merchant from the South Jean Kingdom back off. Who would have thought that the South Jean Kingdom royal merchant would add another 1,000 taels of silver without hesitation? Looking at his calm expression, it seemed that he would not care even if he added tens of thousands of taels of silver. The chief caretaker of the Grand Scholar Manor looked even gloomier. There were some foreign envoys and merchants in the stone house. Most of them were Tangs, the wealthiest kind. They could not help but feel annoyed at the South Jean royal merchant's actions. It was not that they did not have money, but no matter how much they loved Sir Ning's calligraphy, they would feel that the price was too high. The South Jean royal merchant did not seem like he was here to buy the section. Instead, he seemed like he was here to compete with the Tangs, or even to embarrass them. Discussions started in the pavilion. 2 royal merchants from the Tang Empire who lived in the south city of Chang and prepared to bid. The atmosphere became more heated, or rather tense. The only person who could remain calm was probably the seller, Zhongli. He had long known that the South Jean royal merchant was in Chang, and so he had expected such a scene. It could even be said that he had single-handedly caused the conflict between the Tangs and the South Jean Kingdom. Zhongli was the son of the Zhong family in Yangguan. Yangguan was the most prosperous city in the southern border of the Tang Empire. It was very close to the South Jean Kingdom. In fact, it had been the northern capital of the South Jean Kingdom 300 years ago. As such, the people who lived there knew the South Jean Kingdom very well. Even though he had been chased out of the Zhong family a long time ago, he knew everything that had happened in the South Jean Kingdom. He was well aware of the sensitivity and even abnormal self-esteem of the South Jean Kingdom people when they faced the Tangs. Because of something, he was certain that the South Jean royal merchant would not give up on the chicken soup calligraphy no matter what. That was why he dared to say in front of everyone that the chicken soup calligraphy would sell for at least 30,000 taels of silver. Now that it had passed the 30,000 taels of silver, Zhongli could not help but feel proud. As a seller, his greatest honor was to leave his name in the history books along with the goods he sold. As a seller, Zhongli could be calm, happy, and proud. However, as the owner of the stone house, the boss found that the atmosphere was too intense and out of control. He could not be happy no matter what. It was good to earn more commission, but what would he do if he offended 2 important figures? The boss stood behind a pillar on the first floor. He looked at Zhongli with a gloomy expression and signaled with his eyes. Zhongli understood and began to try to reduce the atmosphere. However, as an imperial merchant of the Tang Empire brazenly joined the battle, his attempt to end the auction suddenly turned into a bubble. Hearing the increasing amount of money, even Zhongli, who had seen more extravagant auctions and bigger scenes, began to feel nervous and even terrified. The bidding had already become a battle between the Tang and the South Jean Kingdom. Although this battle had nothing to do with powerhouses or cavalry, it was only about money. However, it was not something he could control. Zhongli lifted his sleeves to wipe his sweat. He realized that he had underestimated the determination of the people of Chang, and to protect their pride. He had also underestimated the influence of the crown prince of the South Jean Kingdom on the South Jean royal merchant. The royal merchant of the South Jean Kingdom made another unbelievable offer. Then, he looked at the nobles of the Tang Empire in the pavilion and smiled. The South Jean Kingdom is not as wealthy as the Tang Empire, and I'm just a small merchant. I'm not worthy of your attention. However, the South Jean Kingdom is one of the few big countries, and we still have some silver in our treasury. Hearing this, the pavilion was in an uproar. Although the Tang people present were rich, If the South Jin royal merchant used the South Jin kingdom's national treasury to bid, who could be his match? Unless the Tang emperor took out the silver from the palace treasury and bid. Just as the merchant had said, although the South Jin kingdom was not as wealthy as the Tang Empire, how could a royal merchant or a grand secretary compare to the amount of silver in their national treasury? Were they really going to be humiliated by the South Jin royal merchant today? Although they could bid as high as they wanted, what if the South Jin royal merchant suddenly stopped bidding? They could not go back on their word when the time came. The laws of the Tang Empire were not just for show and chong, and how can you use the silver in the national treasury to fight with someone? Ning Ke looked at the South Jin royal merchant. He could not understand what was happening. Chu Yuxian said mockingly, "How would such a backward country know any rules? Do you think it's like the Tang Empire?" In the eyes of the South Jin emperor and the crown prince, the national treasury is their own accounting room. They can use it however they want. At this moment, a subordinate of the Grand Secretary hurried to the steward's side and whispered a few words. The steward, who had been silent for a while, turned to look at the South Jin royal merchant in the West Pavilion. He laughed coldly and said, "I was wondering why the South Jin crown prince was so interested in the chicken soup calligraphy. So it's because of the hill master of the Great River Kingdom." The South Jin royal merchant did not deny it. He smiled and said, "That's right. His Highness knows that the hill master loves the chicken soup calligraphy, so he decided to buy it and give it to you." The chief steward looked at the royal merchant from the South Jin kingdom and suddenly laughed out loud. He said mockingly, "Everyone knows that the hill master is infatuated with Mr. Ning Ke of the Tang Empire. That's why she loves the chicken soup calligraphy so much. Does the crown prince expect that the chicken soup calligraphy can replace Mr. Ning Ke in the hill master's heart? This is ridiculous, and ridiculous to the extreme." The South Jin royal merchant's expression changed. The steward did not wait for him to speak. He continued mockingly, "You're trying to use something that belongs to a woman's beloved to make her fall in love with someone else. I really don't know what the crown prince is thinking. I didn't expect the South Jin people to be trash on the battlefield. The swordmaster from the sword garret is trash. You're even so useless in love." The South Jin royal merchant's face darkened at the humiliation. His sleeves trembled and his fists were clenched tightly. However, there was nothing wrong with the steward's words. The South Jin army had never been a match for the Tang cavalry on the battlefield. Lu Qingshan from the sword garret had indeed been killed by Ning Ke at the side door of the academy. The story between the calligraphy addict, Mo Shanshan, and Ning Ke had been spread around the world for many days. The royal merchant suppressed his anger and scolded coldly, "The bidding for the calligraphy is based on strength. Speak if you have money. Don't talk if you don't. Do you think the Tangs only know how to talk?" The moment he said that, the Tangs in the pavilion immediately cursed at him. However, he ignored them and looked at the seller on the stage with a gloomy expression. It seemed like he had made up his mind to use money to pressure the seller. Ning Ke did not expect the South Jin crown prince to buy the chicken soup calligraphy at such a high price just to please Shanshan. After a moment of silence, he took out something from his sleeve and handed it to Chu Yuxian. After saying a few words, he lifted the curtain and walked out of the stone house. Chu Yuxian was stunned for a moment. He gripped the item tightly and walked downstairs to find the owner of the stone house. The owner of the stone house recognized him as Old Master Chu's only son and was slightly stunned. He took the seal from Chu Yuxian and glanced at it. His expression changed drastically. This seal was Ning Ke's private seal and rarely appeared on his calligraphy sections. Not many calligraphy appraisers had seen it before. However, the owner had seen it on the back of the chicken soup calligraphy. The owner then realized that Sir Ning had been quietly watching the auction in the pavilion. When he saw Chu Yuxian's private seal, he thought that Sir Ning was expressing his dissatisfaction and anger. He could not help but feel uneasy. Could it be that his judgment of the old brush pen shop's calligraphy sections was wrong? Did the handmaiden really steal it? He heaved a sigh of relief when he heard Chu Yuxian's words. Chu Yuxian gestured for him to bring him to the stage and invited the famous seller to the side. The people in the pavilion noticed the commotion on the stage and gradually stopped their discussions and cursing. The South Jin royal merchant stood by the railing expressionlessly and looked at the stage. He thought that no matter what the Tangs did, the chicken soup calligraphy would definitely be brought back to the South Jin Kingdom today. The owner cupped his fists and bowed to the people in the 3 pavilions. He then cleared his throat and said, "The chicken soup calligraphy is confirmed to be won by room A2 for 33,000 taels of silver." The pavilion was silent because no one had realized what was going on. Then someone reacted and let out a soft cry of confusion. Room A2 was where the steward of Grand Secretary Wang's residence resided. However, the bidding had not ended. Why did the stone house say that the Grand Secretary Wang's residence had won the chicken soup calligraphy? The South Jin royal merchant's face was livid as he looked downstairs. He questioned coldly, "Even if the bidding ended, I was the one who paid the most. Why did the calligraphy go to someone else? Could it be that all the Tang people do business like this? Don't you care about your reputation?" Chu Yuxian recalled what Ning Ke had said before he left. After making sure that he remembered every word correctly, he looked at him and said mockingly, "So what if you have more money? I won't sell it to you no matter how much money you have. Because Mr. 13 doesn't respect the Crown Prince of South Jin. He actually wrote more than 10,000 words. It seems like energy is really like water in a sponge. There are only a few recommendation votes now. Please squeeze, take a look and vote. Thank you very much. There's another important matter. Taiwanese readers, please be happy. The Zhangye traditional Chinese calligraphy will be sold in bookstores on the 5th of July. I've looked at the cover carefully. I like it very much. There's no problem with it. However, it involves spoilers. Wahahaha, welcome to buy it. The more the better. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 431. Ning Ke was the most inconspicuous in the back of the mountain of the academy, but Mr. 13 was the most famous among the people. His name was spread in the military camp at the frontier fortress, and the people in the streets of Chang, and were talking about the slash at the side door of the academy. The people in the stone house might not know Mr. First or Mr. Second, but how could they not know that Mr. 13 was the owner of the old brush pen shop, Sir Ning? After Chu Yuxian said those words on the stage, the pavilion was silent for a moment. Then there was a sudden burst of cheers and shouts of excitement. The South Jin royal merchant gripped the railing tightly, his face pale with anger. He glared at Chu Yuxian and shouted, "Who are you?" Chu Yuxian held his fan with one hand and placed the other on the back of his hand. He bowed to the crowd and said, "I am Chu Yuxian from Dongcheng, Mr. Ning's representative." Then he looked at the West Pavilion on the 3rd floor, and at the ugly expression of the South Jin royal merchant. He smiled and said, "I can sell the chicken soup calligraphy to anyone but you South Jin people. Do you have a problem with that?" The South Jin royal merchant trembled with anger and scolded, "How can you say that?" The owner of the stone house cupped his hands and explained, "Today, the old brush pen shop's 7 calligraphy pieces have special rules. The supplementary rules have been sent to everyone. Everyone should know that Sir Ning has the right to choose his own buyer." The South Jin royal merchant thought of the document he had seen on the table in the pavilion and suppressed his anger. His chest heaved up and down as he said, "Even if Sir Ning has the right to choose his own buyer, he should be the one to do it. How can he let this representative who we don't even know is the real one exercise his right?" Did the old brush pen shop know about what happened just now? Was Sir Ning here just now? "You Tangs, don't use such shameless methods." The owner was silent for a moment before he smiled and said, "You are right. Sir Ning was here just now, but he has already left." Before he left, he asked Mr. Chu to make the decision. The South Jin royal merchant was stunned. As mentioned earlier, Ning Ke's reputation in Chang and was too resounding, especially after he killed Lu Yiqing. His position in the hearts of the Tangs was extremely high. Everyone wanted to see his true face. At this time, the high officials and nobles in the pavilion were originally here for his calligraphy. When they heard that he was in the pavilion earlier, they couldn't help but beat their chests and stamp their feet in regret. Someone shouted, and the sound of footsteps rang out in the pavilion. Dozens of people opened the bamboo curtains and rushed down the wooden building, unable to restrain their curiosity and excitement, towards the outside of the courtyard. The chicken soup calligraphy had already belonged to Grand Secretary Wang's residence. The people present could not drink the chicken soup, so of course they wanted to see what the old hen that made the soup looked like. In the blink of an eye, the stone house was empty. The royal merchant of South Jin Kingdom stood by the railing. His expression was extremely ugly, but he had nothing to say. "Honorable Ning, wait a moment." "Mr. 13, wait. My master invites you over." People walked out of the courtyard, passed through the green forest, and came to the shore of Willow Lake. Looking at the boat that was getting further and further away from the quiet lake, they waved their arms and shouted for Ning Kei to come back. The boat leisurely moved on the quiet lake. From afar, they could only see a figure dressed in black walking out of the black canopy. He greeted them with his hands folded in front of his chest, and then went ashore. Looking at the back of the figure disappearing into the alley beside the Victory House, the people by the lakeside with regret. There was a rumor in Chang and City that the 7 calligraphy sections being auctioned by the Stonehouse were stolen by the little handmaiden of the old brush pen shop. Ning Kei was present today, so naturally this rumor was denied in some ways. While the auction of the Stonehouse was going on, the little handmaiden Sang Sang was in a quiet study in the backyard of the Ingo Casino in the Western City. She was staring at the pile of papers on the table. Since the night at the Spring Breeze Pavilion 2 years ago, the underworld of Chang and City had been under the control of the Fish Dragon Gang. The study of this casino, which used to belong to a big shot in the Western City, had become the Fish Dragon Gang's warehouse. The papers on the table looked a little new, and the handwriting on them was neat. They were not outstanding, and could not be compared to the calligraphy sections in the old brush pen shop. However, the actual value of these papers was actually quite high. These papers were the title deeds of houses and land. Several old stewards of the casino with deep wrinkles were calculating the title deeds of houses and land. Mr. Chi, the leader of the Fish Dragon Gang, stood aside and stared at them worriedly. The beads on the abacus in the hands of the old stewards moved very fast, making a clicking sound in the quiet room. It sounded crisp and pleasant, but it made Mr. Chi more and more worried. The beads on the abacus were still moving fast, and there was still a long time before the calculation was completed. Sang Sang put down the title deed of the newly built 3-sectioned house on the lakeside and said, 41,462 taels of silver are still missing. Mr. Chi looked at her with a slightly strange expression, thinking that these stewards were the best accounting experts in the casino, but they had not calculated it yet. Where did she get this number? Sang Sang knew what he was thinking, but she did not explain and waited calmly. After some time, the old stewards of the casino finally finished the complicated calculation. The leading steward carefully cleaned up the title deeds of houses and land on the table, and respectfully reported, according to the letter of intent a few days ago, the total number is still missing is 41,600 taels of silver. This number was a little different from the number Sang Sang had calculated, but not by much. Mr. Chi looked at Sang Sang in surprise, thinking that it was really amazing that she could only make such a small mistake in mental calculation. Sang Sang knew that her calculation was correct, and those old stewards had calculated the tax rate wrong on a title deed. However, thinking that the difference was not big, she did not point it out. Looking at her expression, Mr. Chi made a gesture to let those stewards of the casino leave, and then said seriously, the price of houses and land at the foot of Yanming Mountain is indeed cheaper than other places in Chang and City, but if we buy so many houses at once, some greedy guys will always raise the price. Then he shook his head and said, although the brothers in the gang can lower the price, and the Chang and local government has also talked to someone, we can't go too far. If someone reported this to the imperial court, it would be hard for me to explain to second brother Chow when he comes back. So this is probably the final price. It turned out that the title deeds of houses and land on the table were the deeds of the houses by the Yanming Lake. The Yanming Lake had recently been dredged by the Ministry of Works of the Imperial Court, and the accumulated lake mud was still piled up near the sand and stone mountains. It was said that it would not be better until next summer. Because of this, although the scenery of the Yanming Lake at the foot of Yanming Mountain was beautiful, it was still not a good place for people in Chang, and who paid attention to the quality of life. The land and housing prices by the Yanming Lake were the cheapest in Chang'an City. Nowadays, most of the houses by the lake were dilapidated old houses, and the occasional new houses were built by ordinary people who were greedy for cheap. Hearing Mr. Chi's words, Sang Sang nodded and said, "Young master has already predicted that the price will be raised." These days Mr. Chi had been secretly buying the title deeds of houses and land by the Yanming Lake at Ningkei's request. As the leader of the biggest gang in Chang'an City, he naturally had countless subordinates to do this for him. But at this time he still did not understand why Ningkei wanted to buy these properties. It's good to stroll by the Yanming Lake occasionally. It's not suitable to live there. He frowned and said, "Even if you want to live there, you don't have to buy all the houses by the lake. No matter how low the price is, it's still a huge sum." Sang Sang said, "I don't know why young master wants to buy all the houses by the lake. Maybe he wants to be quiet and doesn't want to be disturbed." Mr. Chi shook his head repeatedly and thought that if he really wanted to be quiet, there would be so many beautiful places in Chang'an City to build new houses, and there would be no need to make such a big noise. And it was obviously a losing deal. More than 40,000 taels of silver. Sang Sang looked at the title deeds of houses and land on the table and said to herself, "I don't know if it will be enough." Mr. Chi said, "I do have some money in my hands, but it's all in the public account. I just manage it for second brother Chow and other brothers, so I can't take it out." Sang Sang nodded and said, "Thank you, Mr. Chi." Mr. Chi waved his hand to show that it was okay. And then he came up with an idea and said, "In fact, as long as Ningkei enters the palace and says something, it's not a big deal to get more than 40,000 taels of silver." Sang Sang thought about Ningkei's intention of buying the houses by the Yanming Lake, and understood that he definitely did not want to have anything to do with the imperial court. She shook her head and said, "Let's see what happens in the stone house." "There's no need." Ningkei walked into the room and looked at the title deeds of houses and land on the table. He said, "If the price on the letter of intent will not change, then we have enough money in hand." Mr. Chi sneered and said, "The price we offered is already very generous, and we have already signed the letter of intent. If the owners of the houses by the lake temporarily raise the price, do they really think our brothers of the Fish Dragon Gang are a group of people who believe in Buddhism?" Ningkei liked Mr. Chi's attitude very much and said, "The money will probably be sent here later. At that time, I'll have to trouble you to sign the contract with the owners of the houses." Mr. Chi was a little surprised and asked, "Whose name?" Ningkei said, "Second brother Chow's name first." It was not uncommon for people in Jianghu to entrust their property to their brothers. Mr. Chi said without hesitation, "Okay." Ningkei said, "Can this matter be kept a secret?" Mr. Chi said, "It depends on how long it takes." Ningkei calculated the time and said, "This winter at the latest." Mr. Chi said, "No problem." After leaving the Ingo Casino in the western city, Ningkei and Sang Sang did not directly go back to the old brush pen shop, but went to Yanming Mountain. The two looked at the lake at the foot of the mountain and those scattered courtyards on the other side of the lake. The reason why they bought these courtyards was that the old brush pen shop was too busy now. Although Ningkei liked the lively atmosphere of Lin 47th Street very much, he knew that he could not continue to live there after the visit of the great divine priest of revelation. He bought all the courtyards by the lake for the sake of tranquility, but there were other more important reasons. However, those reasons did not need to be known by others. Sang Sang looked at the houses on the other side of the lake and asked, "Will we live here in the future?" Ningkei nodded and said, "After winter, this lake will be frozen solid. Only one chapter today. Then I feel that my state is almost back. I'll go to work on the outline." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 432. It was late spring in Chang'an, and the temperature was getting hotter. But it was the best season in the wilderness in the north. The breeze blew through the knee-high grass like a green ocean. About 50 miles north of the left King's Palace, there were many colors in the green ocean near the Min Mountain. The scorched ground, the cut grass roots, the broken arrows that were deeply embedded in the ground, and the traces left by the tactical arrays showed that a war had just ended here. The war came to the wilderness with spring and ended as spring deepened. The Central Plains Allied forces were strong, and with the help of the palace's cavalry, they started a series of battles with the Desolate Man tribes that were migrating south. The cruel war lasted for nearly 100 days, and many people died on both sides. However, the Desolate Man managed to hold on to the last line of defense and kept the most important and fertile pastures. The West Hill Divine Palace issued an edict, and all the country's provisions were continuously transported to the Yen Kingdom. Even with the help of powerful cultivators, they still failed to drive the Desolate Man back to the cold region. The reason was that the Desolate Man warriors were strong. The Tang cavalry and the West Hill Papal cavalrymen did not take action. The smell of burning embers floated on the grassland after the war. Not far away, on the sloping meadow of Min Mountain, there were hundreds of piles of stones. All kinds of cloth strips were hung on the piles, dancing in the spring breeze. These piles of stones were the graves of the grassland cavalrymen. Bodies of the Desolate Man warriors were rarely seen on the grassland because no matter how fierce the war was, the Desolate Man would bring their dead companions back to the tribe at all costs. After nearly 100 days of war, the Central Plains Coalition Army did not capture a single Desolate Man. The Tang cavalry, who rode on horses to clean up the battlefield, looked at the piles of stones in the distance and thought of the Desolate Man's performance on the battlefield. They were vigilant and a little impressed. Never be a captive and never leave a comrade behind. This was also the iron rule of the Tang army. The Tang army finally understood why the Desolate Men were called natural-born warriors 1,000 years ago, and why their ancestors spent so much effort to drive the Desolate Men out of the wilderness. They were all the best warriors, so it was not surprising that the Tang army admired the Desolate Man tribe. They wanted to find a chance to fight with the powerful Desolate Man. Regretfully, in this bloody and cruel war, the Great Tang's northeast border army was responsible for escorting supplies, suppressing rebellions, maintaining military discipline, and cleaning up the battlefield. It had no chance of entering the main battlefield, because this was the will of the Great Tang Emperor, as well as the order of General Xiahou. Xiahou looked at the fertile grassland under his feet and the grass roots that had been stepped into the soil by his boots. He slowly moved the soles of his boots, and with a soft sizzling sound, something that looked like oil squeezed out from the side of his boots. In addition to the rotten black soil, there was also a lot of rotten blood. Since the start of the war, the cavalry under his command had yet to face the warriors of the Desolate Man tribe. They had not even seen a single Desolate Man. However, he was not as curious and excited as his subordinates to fight with them, because he was a Desolate Man himself. Looking at the black bloodstains left on the grassland, Xiahou imagined the last battle a few days ago. He imagined the scene of his clansmen, whom he had not seen for a long time, falling under arrows or flying swords. His indifferent face was expressionless, but his eyebrows slightly twitched. The cavalry of the Tang Empire did not go to the front of the battlefield. This was His Majesty's order, as well as his own thoughts. His Majesty knew of his background, but still let him personally command the war. This meant that he agreed with his thoughts. Xiahou was very grateful for His Majesty's trust. A clear whistle came from afar. He looked up expressionlessly and saw a grassland girl riding a horse and herding hundreds of sheep a few hundred feet below the meadow. Not long after the war, the people on the grassland started herding again. From this point of view, life was always peaceful and simple. The war was just an interlude. Looking at the grassland girl with rosy cheeks and bright eyes, Xiahou remembered the scene when he escaped from the front gate many years ago and met his sister again in Hebei County. Then he confirmed that his gratitude to His Majesty had nothing to do with the trust and tolerance he had shown over the years. He was just grateful that His Majesty treated his sister well. Mr. Ke destroyed the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine with a single sword. Xiahou went south to the Tang Empire and served in the army for decades. In the end, he became the top general of the Tang Empire. Then he became a distinguished visiting professor of the West Hill Divine Palace. But no one knew that he was a remnant of the Devil's Doctrine and a descendant of the Desolate Man. General Xiahou seemed to be ruthless and powerful, but in reality, the few important figures in the world who knew his true identity had always tried to use his past identity to threaten and control him. His true identity was like countless spider webs, trapping him in the center of the web. No matter how he struggled, he could not break free. He could only gradually fall silent and then gradually suffocate. The emperor of the Tang Empire and the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace knew where he came from. Both of them were like two indestructible stone walls that had been slowly closing in on each other over the years. Sandwiched between the stone walls, he found it hard to breathe. No matter which side he leaned towards, he would die. He once thought of leaning on both sides of the stone walls. He wanted to be loyal to the Tang Empire and serve the West Hill at the same time. In the past few years he had indeed done so. But two loyalties could not get along. So in the end he could only be loyal to himself. He maintained his strength with violence and coldness, and did not lean against the stone walls. Regrettably, there was a limit to a person's strength. He was still very strong now, but he would grow old, get sick, and become weak. However, those two stone walls would never become weak. Moreover, he had killed many people, and those people wanted to kill him very much. So Xiahou wanted to make himself strong forever. He went to the north of the Hulun Sea and wanted to seize the tomes of Arcane. But in the end, he lost all hope in front of the scholar. When he was truly in despair, he suddenly had a new hope. In front of him at the end of his rope, there was suddenly a glimmer of hope. That scholar made Xiahou give up on the idea of being powerful forever, of being insufferably arrogant forever. But he also discovered the possibility of returning safely, and not caring about the affairs of the world. Summer is coming. Everything is coming to an end. Xiahou looked at the grassland in the spring breeze and thought of the coming midsummer. A rare gentle expression gradually appeared on his cold face. His sister was the empress of the Tang Empire. His sister's name was Summer. The gentle spring breeze blew on the general's gentle face. There was a strong smell of blood in the wind, and then there was a sound of weeding. Not far behind Xiahou, more than 100 grassland cavalrymen and Yin soldiers knelt on the ground. Under the bright knife light, their heads were separated from their bodies, and blood flowed into the sea of grass. These grassland cavalrymen and Yin soldiers were arrested for rebellion and violation of rules. They were all killed without a trial, just because of General Xiahou's words. On the battlefield, the northeast border military of the Tang Empire was responsible for maintaining military discipline and suppressing rebellions. But today's execution without a trial had seriously violated the rules of the Divine Hall and the law of the Tang Empire. But the law of the Tang Empire could not control the general, so Xiahou killed people like grass. His expression did not change. An officer rode a warhorse and galloped from the direction of the military camp. Xiahou took the letter handed by the officer. Although he was stationed in Tuyang City all year round and was far away in the wilderness, he was after all the defender general of the Tang Empire. He had many spies in Chang and City and the imperial court. He did not have many personal relationships with Defender General of the state Su Shi, but they respected each other. So some things in the military ministry would be passed directly to the military camp through those spies. The letter described what had happened in Chang and City recently. Xiahou knew about the two conversations between Su Shi and Ning Quebec. He also knew about the death of Huang Xing and Yu Shuizhu on the rainy street. So he read the letter in silence for a long time. Last year in Tuyang City, he had reached an agreement with the Academy. So he did not want to care about the Academy's entry into the human realm, and would not be as vigilant as Su Shi. However, the death of Huang Xing and Yu Shuizhu made him vigilant. Huang Xing and Yu Shuizhu were the prince's men, and also his men, and they were both involved in that incident. Xiahou did not understand why Ning Ke was against him. First he killed Lin Ling in the wilderness, then he killed Gu Xi in Tuyang City, and now he killed Huang Xing and Yu Shuizhu. All the people close to him had died one by one under his knife. The imperial court and the academy had agreed to his retirement, but it seemed that this person had a different opinion. Is there really a fish that escaped the net? Xiahou frowned slightly and shook his head after thinking for a moment. He knew very well that Lin Guangyuan's son was dead, because he had personally examined the body of the white and clean little boy. Then he remembered a saying in Chang and City. The Academy's Ning Ke and Princess Li Yu were close. Was it because of the dragon throne? Xiahou's expression grew colder and colder. He had already decided to retire, But if someone tried to harm his sister, harm his nephew, or steal the throne that belonged to his nephew, then he would kill the other party at all costs. The executions continued. The heads of the soldiers who violated the rules were cut off and fell on the grassland. The sound of bones scraping could be heard continuously. In the smell of blood, Xiahou thought about what happened in Chang, and gradually became murderous. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in the blue sky above the grassland. The man jumped down from the sky, whistling through the air, and rushed towards Xiahou with an incomparably domineering murderous intent. Xiahou looked up. In addition to the figure in the sky, there was also the blazing sun. So he narrowed his eyes. He was already very familiar with this scene. He had seen it on the northern shore of the Hulun Sea. These days he had seen it several times. So he did not panic, and his expression was still calm and indifferent. An extremely fierce aura gushed out from his body. His leather boots stepped deeply into the soft grassland soil. The next moment, the soft soil instantly became extremely hard. With the soles of his boots as the center, countless traces like a spider web appeared on the grassland. Xiahou stood in the middle of the grassland that was cracked like a spider web. With the huge counterforce from his feet, he flew into the sky. His battle robe fluttered. He was as fast as a flying bird and as bright as a god. Tang, the world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine, jumped down from the sky. Xiahou, the former powerhouse of the Devil's Doctrine, flew into the sky. The two men met in the sky above the grassland. Once they met, it was like a bolt from the blue. In the clear sky, a muffled thunder suddenly sounded. A powerful shockwave began to spread from the sky in all directions. In the distance, the sheep that were lowering their heads to graze were startled and fell to the ground. The grassland girl who was herding the sheep was startled and fell off her horse. The Tang soldiers who were executing the military law covered their ears and knelt down in pain. The strong wind blew, and the sea of grass was flattened and broken grass was flying. Oh, I'm still one breath away. 1 chapter today and 2 chapters tomorrow. I'll gradually pull myself back to the state. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 433. The two silhouettes met in the air, like the legendary floating mountains in the depths of the western wilderness colliding with each other. The terrifying sound of the collision reverberated in all directions. The sharp blood-red broadsword stirred up countless whistling sounds in the air, as if the blue sky was about to be split open. However, most of the momentum of the broadsword was blocked by a pair of iron fists. Occasionally, the broadsword broke through Xiahou's iron fists and fell on his body. Xiahou's battle robe would emit a pale yellow luster, preventing the sharp broadsword from biting into his body. The blood-red broadsword was the most powerful weapon of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Although it could not break into Xiahou's body, its weight and the impact made it a horrible iron hammer, hitting Xiahou's body heavily. Xiahou's iron fists were iron hammers, mercilessly hitting Tang's chest and abdomen. In the blink of an eye, the two powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine hit each other countless times in the air. They hit each other countless times. They hit each other countless times. They hit each other countless times. The two floating hills kept hitting each other, separating, and then colliding again. The sound of the collision, like muffled thunder, kept ringing in the sky not far from the grassland. The continuous rumbling of thunder was so close that the sheep lying in the sea of grass, their bodies stiff, instinctively felt the terror of death. Terrified, they propped up their limp legs and fled in all directions. The grassland girl, who fell from the horse, lay in the grass and looked at the two godlike figures in the sky. She was so shocked and scared that she turned into a fool. She couldn't care less about her flock of sheep. The soldiers of the Tang army, who were enforcing the military law, covered their ears and knelt on the grass with pale faces. 3 soldiers who were lucky enough not to be beheaded could not cover their ears because their hands were tied. Black blood gradually flowed out of the corners of their eyes and noses. A moment later, they were shocked to death by the collision of the two powerhouses in the air. The horses on the meadow neighed in panic. The heaviest muffled thunder sounded in the sky above the grassland. The fierce wind swept the earth from the sky, breaking the long grass and flying everywhere. The two figures in the air finally separated, retreated hundreds of feet, and fell on the grassland. Two muffled sounds almost at the same time sounded on the grassland. Xiahou and Tang's domineering aura leaked out a little as their feet landed on the ground. The grassland under their boots suddenly collapsed and turned into two pits. The spring grass in the pits turned into broken pieces, like newly built tombs that had not been sealed. Enemy attack. Assassins. Even though they were facing peerless powerhouses like the world wayfarer of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, the well-trained border army of the Tang army woke up with a strong will and began to organize a defense line. The sound of horses' hooves and armors collided incessantly. In the military camp at the bottom of the meadow, hundreds of heavily armored black cavalry of the Tang Empire assembled at an unimaginable speed. They formed two vanguard formations and galloped out of the camp, leaving grass and dust in their wake as they launched a surprise attack and sealed off the meadow. Then there was the sound of wheels rolling. More than 10 heavy-duty crossbows were pushed out of the camp and aimed at the man on the meadow. Array masters, under the protection of powerful attendants, began to set up temporary arrays. The Tang cavalrymen stared at the man on the meadow with grim expressions. The enemy was only one person. The Tang army was fully prepared, but they still sensed an unprecedented danger. The atmosphere on the meadow became extremely tense. Tang stood in the meadow, stood in the slightly sunken pits, stood in front of hundreds of the most elite Tang cavalry in the world, stood in front of countless crossbow bolts. His expression was still calm, still silent, as if he had seen nothing. He only had eyes for Xiahou, who was not far away. Dun was still wearing the ordinary leather jacket, but compared to the past, his leather jacket looked more shabby, and many parts of it had even rotted. His expression was calm, but his face was somewhat haggard. He had helped the Senior Statesman Society lead the tribe to fight against the Central Plains Allied forces for many days. Recently, he had continuously attacked Xiahou and fought with the Tang army several times. Even if he was an Iron Man, he would still feel tired. Especially in the previous battle with Xiahou. Although it was a short battle, he had suffered serious injuries. Countless holes had appeared on the leather jacket between his chest and abdomen, and the color of blood could be vaguely seen. The blood-red saber in his hand was also somewhat dim. The Tang army was undoubtedly the most powerful army in the world. In the past years, under the command of General Xiahou, they had conquered the Yin Kingdom in the east and attacked the wilderness in the north. They had won every battle and conquered everything. They were extremely proud and confident. However, in front of this person they could not be proud. The Tang army was not afraid of cultivators, because they thought that no matter how powerful a cultivator was, he was no different from an ordinary person in front of the black armored cavalry and crossbow bolts. But they had never seen a cultivator as powerful as Tang. The commander of the Tang cavalry stared at the man in the leather jacket in the distance and said coldly, "If we can't kill this monster today, how can we still call ourselves the Tang cavalry?" The hundreds of Tang cavalrymen on the meadow heard this and their expressions suddenly became solemn. They pulled out their padeos from their sheaths and collectively shouted, "Yes, sir." Hundreds of padeos were pulled out from their sheaths at the same time. The sound of the padeos being pulled together became very solemn and even tragic. In the days after the war between the Central Plains Coalition Army and the Desolate Man, the man in the leather jacket on the meadow appeared around the Tang army 7 times. The Tang cavalrymen had surrounded him 7 times, but none of them had succeeded. Instead, this man had killed many of them. He had even succeeded in advancing 3 times, until he was in front of General Xiahou. If the general was not powerful and invincible, he would have been killed by the man. Ordinary people were not as powerful as cultivators, and ordinary cavalrymen were not as powerful as cultivators. The Tang soldiers could accept this, but they could not accept that they could not even stop the man. They could not accept that as subordinates, they had to rely on the general to maintain the safety of the camp. For the proud Tang cavalrymen, this was the greatest humiliation. The bleak whistling of the military flute sounded around the meadow. Nearly 800 Tang cavalrymen in heavy armor began to slowly form a formation. The array master with crossbows in the camp also pushed forward dozens of feet. A battle between the world's strongest cavalrymen and the world's strongest cultivators was about to begin. After betraying the front gate, you really became a coward. You only know how to hide in the camp and always let your men die. Tang looked at Xiahou and said. Xiahou put his fist to his lips and coughed twice. He stretched out his hand to stop the actions of his subordinates around the meadow. Then he looked up at Tang and said, My troops did not participate in the war against the tribe. You know very well why. So I don't understand why you have been trying to kill me since last year, even risking your life to kill me. Tang took off his felt hat and threw it at his feet. Then he slowly walked out of the collapsed sea of grass and stopped about 10 feet away from Xiahou. He said, Because there are many people in the front gate waiting for you to go back. Xiahou frowned slightly. His eyebrows, which seemed like they were carved out of iron wire, looked cold and hard once he frowned. There was no one alive in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. There were only white skeletons and dead people on the ground. Then the people waiting for him to go back were not people, but those unwilling ghosts. Before the front gate was broken by Mr. Ku, your teacher and I had already left. This has nothing to do with me. You can't blame me for this. But after you went south, you still became a visiting professor of the West Hill Divine Palace. Tang said, A traitor is a traitor. The ancestors of the Enlightenment Doctrine are all waiting for you to go back and apologize. Senior Sister Murong is also waiting for you in the steamer. Hearing the word Murong, Xiahou's frowned eyebrows gradually dimmed. After a long silence he said, It's not that easy to kill me. Tang said, If I reveal your true identity, who in the world can tolerate you? Xiahou said, It's enough that the West Hill, His Majesty, and the Academy can tolerate me. This means that heaven can tolerate me. As long as heaven can tolerate me, no one in the world will dare to not tolerate me. Tang said, The Emperor of the Tang Empire can tolerate you because of your military achievements. Maybe he wanted to get rid of you long ago, but he didn't want to have a direct conflict with the West Hill. He didn't have any evidence, so he sent you to the border. The reason why the Academy didn't kill you is that the people in the Academy have long forgotten how to kill. Maybe what you said makes sense. Xiahou looked at him expressionlessly and said, But you are not the Haotian Taoism, the Emperor of the Tang Empire, or the Academy. So you can't kill me. And now in the whole world only you want to kill me. Tang said, Why can't I kill you? Xiahou looked at the blood-red giant knife in his hand, and the terrible blade that penetrated deep into the ground of the grassland. He said, Because the divine knife has dimmed in your hands. Tang said, Your armor has also been broken. The battle robe that Xiahou was wearing was a new one that he had changed in the morning. At this time it had already been shredded by Tang's blade, revealing the armor that glowed with a metallic luster. He was the Defender General of the Tang Empire. The armor on his body was personally designed by Professor Huang He of the Academy and supervised by the Academy. It was engraved with complicated talisman lines that could provide him with seemingly endless protection. However, even though it seemed endless, it was not truly endless. Last year in the north of the Hulun Sea, the blood-red giant knife in Tang's hand had left a deep mark on the armor. In recent days of continuous battles, the armor had become much dimmer than in the past, especially near the chest and abdomen. There were even a few cracks, indicating that it would break. This armor wouldn't be able to last much longer. You have been injured all the time. Xiahou looked at the fist marks and bloodstains on Tang's chest and abdomen and said, And you have been seriously injured. If you were in good condition, it would probably take about 4,000 armored black cavalries to trap you. But now you may die in the iron hooves at any time. If you want to kill me, you must be prepared to be killed by me at any time. Only if you can break my legs will your cavalry be able to trap me. Tang said, But you know it is not easy to break my legs. You tried to do this 3 times in a row, but you did not succeed. You will never succeed. After a short pause he said, And you're also constantly getting injured. Xiahou said, My injuries are lighter than yours. Tang said, But you are older than me. Xiahou said, We are both disciples of the Enlightenment Doctrine. Do you still believe the nonsense of old age and weak health? Tang said, Old age does not mean that my body is weak, but my spirit is definitely not as good as it was. For example, you are more afraid of death now than before. Of course, you have been afraid of death since you cooked Murong. Xiahou was silent. The older one is, the more easily he is afraid of death. The more cowardly one is, the more easily he is afraid of death. And the more afraid one is, the more easily he will die. Tang looked at him and said, as long as you do not return to Chang'an, I will always follow you and continue to waste time with you. I want to see you die in front of me with my own eyes. Xiahou did not say anything else. He turned and walked down the meadow. The flute suddenly sounded, and the hooves around the meadow thundered. Hundreds of heavy armored black cavalries rushed toward Tang, who was standing quietly on the meadow like a stream of iron. Xiahou walked toward the military camp in the distance without looking back. Hearing the roaring flames on the meadow behind him, he did not look back. Listening to the thunder-like impact, he still did not look back. After 3 consecutive attacks and counterattacks, Tang never made a move. He never found a chance to hurt Tang's leg. So Tang would never let himself fall into the vortex of the charge of thousands of cavalries. From the moment he betrayed the devil's doctrine, Xiahou knew that this day would come sooner or later. But he did not expect that the devil's doctrine was not responsible for killing the traitor, but the disciple of the 23-year cicada cultivation. He admitted that Tang was right. He was indeed more afraid of death now than before, but he was not worried that he would die in Tang's hands or legs. Because although Tang was one of the most powerful people in the world, he was also afraid. If it was the 23-year cicada cultivation, he had no choice but to escape back to Chang'an. Xiahou thought so. Dozens of old houses and new houses had changed owners by the Yanming Lake at the foot of Yanming Mountain. The new owner did not make too many changes to the lakeside houses. He did not completely demolish and rebuild them, but he still spent a lot of money to renovate and tidy up the lakeside. Hundreds of workers and more than 10 carts gathered by the lakeside and began to remove the lake mud. The gardener invited from the scholar's mansion began to direct the boatmen to plant lotus in the lake. The owners of the old houses who had just moved away heard about what was happening here. They brought the old and the young back to Yanming Lake to see what was happening. Seeing the lake mud being removed by carts, seeing the boats planting lotus in the lake, and thinking about the beautiful scenery next year, they could not help but feel envious. Envy was envy. Perhaps there was some regret, but there was no jealousy or hatred. The people of Chang and had always been praiseworthy in this aspect. Since the new owner had spent money, then the other party should spend money to renovate Yujing. This was all the enjoyment that the other party deserved. The renovation of Yanming Lake was organized by Mr. Chi's Fish Dragon Gang. Ning Ke only asked them to temporarily not change the structure of the house and to plant more lotus. He did not know the specific construction and did not want to participate. So he still lived in the old brush pen shop on Lin 47th Street. Darky specially reminded me that Xiahou is afraid of water. Ning Ke sat by the well and looked at the quiet and dark well water. He said, but I don't understand why a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts would be afraid of water. Maybe Xiahou deliberately said that to deceive people. So I will not try to drown him. I decided to kill him and then plant him in lotus. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 434. In late spring it was getting hot and humid, but the brick-lined well was cool. Ning Ke sat on it and didn't want to leave. He waved the kitchen knife in his hand and talked excitedly. Sang Sang hung the clothes on the line and wiped her wet hands on the apron. Then she walked back to the wall and picked up the pin. After finishing the last piece, she asked, how do we kill him? Ning Ke left the well and walked to her. He pointed to something on the wall and said, first, then kill him. Sang Sang put down the pen and looked back at him with a puzzled expression. The thing on the wall was a wooden figure with a pedestal. Ning Ke carved it himself. Sang Sang painted it with a thick layer of black paint. And there was a small black pot on the head of the wooden figure. To kill a person you have to hit his body first. That is to say, you have to break his defense first. Ning Ke pointed the kitchen knife at the little wooden figure and said. Then, he swung the kitchen knife horizontally and forcefully made a cut on his forearm. A moment later, the white cut on his arm was faintly oozing with blood. After I inherited youngest uncle's mantle and joined the devil, My body has become incredibly strong. As you can see, Xiahou is a powerhouse of the devil's doctrine. You can imagine how strong his body is. He showed his cut forearm to Sang Sang and explained. Sang Sang scooped up a ladle of cool well water and washed the blood on his arm. Then she took out a handkerchief from her sleeve and wrapped it carefully for him. While she was doing this, Ning Ke continued his analysis. Xiahou betrayed the devil's doctrine and joined Haotian Taoism. He became a visiting professor of the West Hill Divine Palace. To help him hide his identity, the Divine Hall may have taught him the secret method of martial arts cultivation. It's not maybe, it's certain. He looked at the black paint on the wooden figure and said, Xiahou can use his psyche power to mobilize the qi of heaven and earth and condense it on the surface of his body. This layer of defense is like the paint on the wooden figure. The most troublesome thing is his armor. Ning Ke knocked the small black pot on the head of the wooden figure with the kitchen knife. The armor of the 4 generals of the Tang Empire was made by the Academy. The one on Xiahou's body is the same. It was designed by Professor Huang He and made by 4th brother and 6th brother. Although it may not be as powerful as the one on Su Shi's body, it is still very powerful. Armor, protective genuine qi, and the terrifying physical body of the experts of the devil's doctrine. These are 3 layers of protection. They can be used day and night. I think even the primordial 13 arrows can't penetrate them. Sang Sang couldn't understand such a tasteless and uninteresting joke about day and night and 3 layers of protection. She paused for a moment and then thought of the Academy's attitude. She said worriedly, assassinating the general of the Empire. Even the Academy will not allow you to do this. Ning Ke said, when did I say that I would assassinate him? Sang Sang asked, why don't we expose the relationship between Xiahou and the devil's doctrine? I promised eldest brother that I wouldn't tell anyone about Xiahou's identity. After a short pause, Ning Ke said, including his relationship with the Empress. Sang Sang asked in confusion, but you told me. Ning Ke said, you are not someone else. Sang Sang nodded and said, that's true. After a moment, she thought of the calligraphy auction at the stone house and said, you can't even solve Xiahou's problem. Why do you have to offend the crown prince of the South Jin Kingdom? Ning Ke didn't know how to explain it to Sang Sang. He couldn't possibly say it in front of her. At that time, when he heard that the crown prince of the South Jin Kingdom wanted to buy the chicken soup calligraphy to please the calligraphy addict, he felt angry for no reason. What were cultivators to us in the past? He changed the topic cleverly. Sang Sang thought of the conversation she had with Ning Ke in the city of Wei as a child. She thought of the burned record of the Tao and said, back then, cultivators were immortals in our eyes. Ning Ke said, then I am immortal now. We are immortals. Sang Sang laughed happily. Ning Ke said with a smile, I'm not even afraid of the crown prince of the Tang Empire. Why would I be afraid of the crown prince of the South Jin Kingdom? Sang Sang reminded him, the Tang Empire doesn't have a crown prince. Ning Ke's smile faded and he sighed. This is another troublesome matter. At the back of the mountain of the Academy, by the stream behind the blacksmith's house, under the big water cart, Ning Ke, 4th brother and 6th brother squatted by the stream and stared blankly. After an unknown period of time, 6th brother raised the black iron object in his hand to the sunlight. Ning Ke and 4th brother's eyes followed his movement. It was an iron object that looked like a small wine pot. There were many lines carved on it. Those lines were deep into the money and most of them were straight. They couldn't see any deeper meaning. 6th brother touched the lines on the small iron pot with his thick fingers and said, it's uniform enough. For a master blacksmith like 6th brother, the difference that couldn't be seen by the naked eye couldn't escape the touch of his fingers. If his fingers judged that the lines were uniform, then they must be uniform. These lines cut the area of the iron pot into 64 pieces. It's not exactly the same, but it's close enough. Especially the depth of the lines and the bearing capacity of the curved surface, it can ensure the uniformity when it breaks. 4th brother picked up a branch from the side, pointed to the small iron pot and said, Junior brother's idea sounds very reasonable, but I tried it with gunpowder last night and it didn't work. I don't know if we should deepen the engraved lines a little bit. Maybe in this way we can guarantee that it will break. Sixth brother shook his head and said, if the lines are deeper, the internal stress of the iron pot will be destroyed and the structure will disperse. Once it breaks, it will just be a firecracker. Ninkei hesitated for a moment and asked, how about we try it with the real thing? Really? Maybe it will work. Think so. Sixth brother looked at fourth brother. Fourth senior brother nodded. There was a spiral mouth at the top of the small iron pot, which was a perfect art carefully carved by sixth brother. Ninkei unscrewed the iron pot stopper and said, even if it doesn't work, we can sell it as a wine pot. Sixth senior fellow apprentice smiled honestly. Ninkei took out a yellowish fire talisman and stuffed it into the iron pot. Then he tightened the stopper. How? Sixth brother asked nervously. Fourth brother pointed to the clear stream in front of him and said, throw it in. Ninkei was a little nervous. Hearing this, he threw the small iron pot into the stream. Wait a minute. Sixth brother ran back to the iron-making room and carried 2 huge fine iron plates. He erected them by the stream and put them in front of the 3 people. Fourth brother said unhappily, even if it succeeds, how powerful can it be? Why are you so nervous? Sixth brother said seriously, when youngest brother was developing the talisman arrow, fourth brother thought of the pavilion in the mirror lake that was half collapsed. His expression changed slightly and he stood behind the fine iron plates. Seeing that everyone was ready, Ninkei closed his eyes and his psyche power slowly seeped out from his sense of perception. It passed through the iron plates in front of him, through the clear stream and into the small iron pot at the bottom of the stream. Then it fell on the talisman paper. As the psyche power entered the small iron pot, there was also a pure great spirit. The fire talisman in the small iron pot at the bottom of the stream suddenly burned violently, but it was confined in a very small space. After a moment, a deafening explosion resounded in the stream. Boom! Accompanied by a shrill roar. Countless iron pieces shot out. Tock 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 tock. The sound gradually subsided. After a long time, the 3 academy brothers behind the fine iron plates cautiously poked their heads out. Their academy uniforms had been completely soaked by the stream. Looking at the fragments of the small iron pot that were deeply embedded in the iron plate, thinking that if they didn't have this layer of protection, these iron fragments would have shot through their bodies like arrows. The 3 of them became abnormally pale, and a lingering fear surged in their hearts. Fourth senior brother, who was usually the calmest, looked at the dead fish floating in the stream and the half-collapsed water wheel in the stream. His voice trembled as he said, little junior brother, what are you doing? Tomorrow is Saturday, but we have a holiday, so there is no rest. Have a good weekend, see you tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 435. The bank of the stream was not blown up, but many fish in the stream were killed. They turned their white bellies and floated on the muddy water. Sixth brother stared at the stream and suddenly said, this is better than the primordial 13 arrows. Any talisman master can use it, but the manufacturing process is a little more particular. It is difficult for the craftsmen in the Ministry of Works to make it. Moreover, most talisman masters are weak, so it is difficult for them to get close to the city wall on the battlefield. These small iron kettles that can explode are used to attack the city, and they are always successful. If, as you said, there are more talisman masters, and they are all as strong as youngest brother, the Tang army will definitely sweep the world without any scruples. Fourth senior brother murmured. The paleness on his face gradually faded away. His usually calm eyes were still filled with shock, as well as some other extremely complicated emotions. Master Yensei really has a unique vision. I always thought that although my junior brother's aptitude in talisman Taoism was excellent, it was not as good as the calligraphy addict. Thinking of the talisman arrow last year, I realized that what Master Yensei valued most was the fantastic ideas in your mind that were completely not limited by the rules. He suddenly made a deep bow to Ning Quebec. Ninkei was startled and hurriedly avoided. Fourth brother straightened up, looked at his eyes and said very seriously, talisman masters in the eyes of the world are powerful, but they are often restrained in the battle. Today, youngest brother, your wonderful ideas let talisman masters have offensive weapons. I thank you on behalf of all the talisman masters in the world. Don't tell others about this for the time being. It must be kept secret. Fourth brother murmured, I have to ask the teacher first. It is too dangerous, too dangerous. There were countless dead fish by the stream, and the water wheel was broken. Ning-Ke walked to the iron plate and tried to dig out the fragments of the small iron kettle deeply embedded in the iron plate. However, he found that he could not dig them out with his own strength. He could not help but say, this is not scientific. According to his design and calculation, the fire talisman burned in the small iron kettle. Because there was too little air in the iron kettle, even if it could successfully explode, it should be far less powerful than the experimental results. So he thought it was not scientific. Suddenly, he remembered that when he activated the talisman paper, he had sent some great spirit into the small iron kettle. In essence, the great spirit was the absolutely pure chi of heaven and earth. When the talisman made by a talisman master was not very powerful, if the talisman paper was provided with sufficient pure chi of heaven and earth, the power of the talisman could be greatly enhanced. This was the method that he had thought of when he accepted the challenge from monk Guanhai of the Lang Temple, and meditated for half a day by the Yanming Lake. Previously, he had poured some great spirit into the small iron kettle, which was equivalent to pouring liquid oxygen into the small iron kettle. The liquid oxygen helped the fire talisman burn fiercely, which made the power of the explosion much greater. Apart from himself, could other talisman masters do this? Ning-Ke stood by the stream, frowning and thinking hard. He thought that if he really wanted to use this method on the battlefield, the talisman master needed to have a strong enough control over the chi of heaven and earth. In other words, this method had a high requirement for the talisman master's state. There were very few talisman masters in the world, and there were even fewer talisman masters who could enter the upper see-through state. It seemed that it was still wishful thinking to rely on the small iron kettle to change the pattern of the war in the world. However, it could at least change the situation of the battle. The loud noise by the stream startled the people in the back of the mountain of the academy. However, the first to arrive at the stream was not a person, but the proud big white goose. The big white goose looked at the murky stream water and the dead fish floating on the surface. Perhaps it was sad that its pet had been killed. It straightened its neck and squawked at the three people on the other side of the river. It seemed especially angry. Fourth brother and sixth brother walked directly behind Ning-Ke and kept silent. Ning-Ke thought bitterly, was this the meaning of the dead younger brother but not the dead senior brother? He did not want to fight with this guy by the stream. This guy looked very strong, and even if he won there would be no glory. He hurriedly comforted, don't be angry, don't be angry. Tomorrow I will buy 2 baskets of fish, and pour them into the stream to play with you. Wooden fish, don't be angry. This is a sacrifice that must be made for the progress of science. The big white goose second brother raised was called wooden fish. The brothers in the back of the mountain of the academy did not know why second brother gave the big white goose such a name. No one in the academy cultivated Buddhism. According to Seventh Sister's private analysis, it was probably because second brother habitually used the stick on his head to discipline the big white goose, just like knocking on wooden fish. That was why the big white goose was named wooden fish. Seventh sister could discuss and guess at will, but the other brothers did not dare to ask second brother for confirmation. After all, the proud big white goose had never shown the sacred beast of the Buddhism sect. It would not resist when people knocked on its head, and it would accept it submissively. For example, at this moment, no matter how Ning-Ke comforted it, it was ready to jump over the stream and fight with him. Fortunately, second brother came at this time, and the big white goose sadly shook its butt and left. Eldest brother also came. He looked at the stream for a long time and looked at Ning-Ke blankly. He slowly asked, teacher was taking a nap and was woken up by the noise. He asked me to come and ask what happened. Second brother respectfully said, when teacher and senior brother traveled, the back of the mountain was often like this. It happened after youngest brother entered the academy. Ning-Ke thought to himself, why does this sound like a complaint? Fourth brother nodded and said, today's test is the small iron kettle designed by youngest brother. Ning-Ke explained the small iron kettle to the 2 senior brothers. Sixth brother took out 2 small iron kettles from the smithy and handed them to the 2 senior brothers. Eldest brother looked at the carved little iron kettle in his hand and praised, using space to suppress the fire, and then using the fire to attack space. Using the theory of firecrackers in a talisman battle, youngest brother's design is indeed wonderful and interesting. But everything needs air to burn, even fire talismans are no exception. This is the reason why fire talismans cannot be used in the depths of the ocean, but I don't know why youngest brother's fire talisman burned so fiercely. Hearing this, Ning-Kei immediately admired eldest brother from the bottom of his heart. Only then did he understand why eldest brother was always the head of the academy. The knowledge related to burning was of course easy for him, but he did not expect eldest brother to understand it so thoroughly and instantly think of the problem. Eldest brother might be slow in everything, but his thinking was fast. Ning-Kei privately told eldest brother about how to use it and the matters related to the Great Spirit. Eldest brother thought for a moment and came to the same conclusion. Cultivators who could use small iron kettles must be able to make more powerful moves than small iron kettles. It seemed that those small iron kettles were the most suitable for Ning-Kei in his current state. However, eldest brother did not think that Ning-Kei was doing useless work, or that it was just a trick. He seemed to have guessed Ning-Kei's intention of making small iron kettles. Eldest brother did not point it out, but just sighed and left the stream. Ning-Kei stood by the stream and thought for a moment, and then left as well. On the meadow, second brother's little attendant was feeding wolves, horses, geese and old cattle. The little fellow was responsible for the food and daily life of these guys in the back of the mountain of the academy. In the past, Ning-Kei fed the big black horse precious food such as sealwort from sixth brother. Only now did he know that those were all dug up by 11th brother when he tasted the hundreds of grasses and flowers in the back of the mountain. Every time he thought of this, he was very envious of these guys' food and treatment. After talking with the little attendant for a while, Ning-Kei inquired about second brother's plans in the afternoon, and confirmed that second brother would not appear in the pavilion in the middle of the lake in the afternoon. Ning-Kei played with the big black horse for a while, galloping wildly on the meadow for a while, and then quietly went to the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Seventh sister was sitting in the pavilion in the middle of the lake with her head down to embroider. The lake light shone on her face through the embroidery frame, making her look extraordinarily beautiful. Ning-Kei sat beside her and said with a smile, "Senior sister, second brother is not in the pavilion. Why do you have to pretend to be elegant and quiet?" Seventh sister raised her head and stared at him fiercely. She said, "When did I pretend?" Ning-Kei joked, "Didn't you hear the loud noise by the stream?" Seventh sister said, "Do you think I am like a scholar who can be deaf whenever I want? Then why didn't you go to see the fun?" "I don't like to see the fun." "Look, this is what you're doing." "Can you say that again?" "I mean, every time there is fun in the back of the mountain, senior sister is always the first one to arrive. You are really warm-hearted and kind." Seventh sister said sarcastically, "I don't know what strange things you have come up with this time. I don't want to see them. It is more important to guard my pavilion." The pavilion in the middle of the lake was destroyed by Ning-Kei's talisman arrow last time. Ning-Kei said, "Speaking of which, I have really found something interesting recently." Seventh sister's eyes were already a little dazzled from embroidery, and she was already a little tired of pretending to be elegant and quiet. Hearing this, her eyes suddenly lit up and she asked, "What is it? From the underworld market?" Ning-Kei shook his head, took out the house drawing of the Yanming Lake, and put it on the embroidery frame in front of her. He said, "I bought a large house a few days ago." Seventh sister looked at the lake line on the drawing and said, "It is really good to live near the lake." Ning-Kei said, "This lake is the left eye of the God-stunning array." Seventh sister was slightly stunned. She looked up at him and did not speak. Ning-Kei pointed to the Yanming Lake on the drawing and said, "I want to use the left eye of the God-stunning array to set up a tactical array in these houses by the lake. But senior sister, you know I am a little stupid in this aspect. When I asked you to set up a few array flags you could set them askew. So you are not stupid but an idiot." Seventh sister corrected him. Ning-Kei asked senior sister, "Are you interested?" Seventh sister's eyes were getting brighter and brighter. She had long been attracted by the drawing and did not look at him. She said, of course, setting up an array is more interesting than embroidery. Ninkei nervously rubbed his hands and said, can it be done in 100 days? Seventh sister said, what kind of tactical array do you want to set up? To kill people or to guard against people? Ninkei said, is there a kind of tactical array that can transmit my psyche power to every corner of the lake? Seventh sister waved her hand and said, that is easy. 10 days will do. See you tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 436. Ninkei did not see Chan Pippi and Tang Xiaotang at the back of the mountain of the academy. He could not help but feel curious. When he left the back of the mountain and passed by the old library, he went upstairs to read some books. He saw third sister Yu Lian by the east window and bowed to her. Unexpectedly, she did not know where Tang Xiaotang was. Was Chan Pippi really in love with Tang Xiaotang? He smiled as he thought about it. Then his expression became a little solemn. Some things belong to everyone. It's meaningless to worry about them. Yu Lian put down the pen in her hand and looked up at him. She said, for example, your business will always be your business, and you can only handle it yourself. It was already the deepest part of late spring. The east window was sheltered from the blazing sun. The wind filtered through the green trees outside the window was not dry yet. But in the forest by the wetland, cicadas were already singing. Ninkei understood the meaning of senior sister's words. Looking at her innocent cheeks and mature and quiet eyes, he suddenly felt that he seemed to have forgotten something very important, which was related to senior sister. The summer wind finally spread from the sea to the depths of the continent. The West Hill Divine Kingdom was located in the southwest of the Tang Empire. It was closer to the sea, so summer came earlier here. The abundant rain and warm air stimulated the plants on Peach Mountain to grow excitedly. Countless green plants grew on the beautiful white jade cliffs. The greenery covered the whole mountain, arching around the numerous Taoist temples on the broken cliffs, adding a touch of beauty to the solemnity of this place. There was a stone house in a remote corner of the third cliff. Compared to the luxuriant surroundings, the stone house looked extremely monotonous and even a little withered. There were few people around. The stone house was not completely enclosed. On the side facing the cliff plateau, there were dozens of air holes. Light shone in through those air holes. Although they were not like windows, they could at least bring some light. There was a desk under the air holes. Yi Hongyu sat by the desk and looked at the paper on the desk quietly. She looked very focused, as if all her attention was attracted by the paper and nothing else. It was a letter from the sword Garrett of South Jin Kingdom. There was a sword made with clumsy techniques and lines on the paper. She had been sitting in the stone house and reading the sword on the paper for a few days. Her food and drink were all sent by the servants of the judicial department. She did not know that the cliffs outside the stone house had already turned red and green. She did not know that the seasons had changed from spring to summer, and she did not care about the change of attitude of the people in the divine hall towards her. One night in summer, someone came to the stone house. The door of the stone house was slowly pushed open, revealing Chunbachi's seemingly respectful face. Chunbachi looked at the young girl in a blue Taoist robe beside the desk and greedily admired the graceful figure under the Taoist robe. After a moment, he lowered his head and said, "The commander awaits your reply." Chunbachi was an official of the judicial department and was once the commander of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall. The commander he mentioned was naturally not himself, but Luo Kadi, the Divine Guard commander with a special status in the Divine Hall. Hearing this, Yi Hongyu did not react. She still sat by the table and flipped through the book in front of her. The letter with the sword on it had been inserted into the book by her. Seeing her indifferent reaction, Chunbachi was not surprised. He smiled mockingly and continued, "The commander knelt in front of the hierarch for a whole night yesterday." Yi Hongyu's slender fingers that were flipping through the book froze slightly. Her gaze on the book became more and more indifferent. "The Lord Commander is very sincere towards you. Even the sect master has sensed this. The Lord Commander has asked me to pass on a message to you. He hopes that you will be able to understand this point." Chunbachi did not say anything more. In his opinion, since even the hierarch had expressed his tacit consent to this matter, she was just a Tao addict who had been crippled. She had no right to refuse. Yi Hongyu did not refuse, nor did she say that she needed some time to consider like last time. She did not turn around to look at Chunbachi. She did not condense a sword with her angry and cold eyes. She just remained silent. She silently looked at the book on the table, and then continued to flip until she reached the place where the letter was. Looking at the crooked sword on the paper, she said indifferently, "Even with you, there is still not enough time." Chunbachi did not hear clearly what she said. Yi Hongyu took out the letter and tore it. She did not tear the letter into pieces. Instead, she used her nimble fingers to carefully tear the sword off the letter along the crooked and uneven ink lines. After a moment, a small, thin and crooked paper sword appeared between her slender fingers. "What do you think this is?" Yi Hongyu held the paper sword with 2 fingers and asked Chunbachi. Chunbachi frowned and looked at the piece of paper. He could not understand it. Yi Hongyu said, "You can't even understand this. No wonder you are always blind." After saying this, she stretched her right hand forward and stabbed the paper sword between her fingers towards Chunbachi's eyebrows. Chunbachi used to be the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, and had the cultivation of the upper see-through state. Even when Yi Hongyu was at her peak, he was only slightly weaker than her. Now Yi Hongyu's cultivation state had already fallen to the lower see-through state, and might even fall into the no-doubt state. She was no longer the Tao addict from before. Why would he be afraid? Looking at the paper sword stabbing towards his eyebrows, Chunbachi was shocked and slightly angry. A mocking smile immediately appeared on his face. In his eyes, the paper sword that was about the length of a finger was extremely ridiculous. He thought to himself she would rather die than bow her head? Then she could only wait to be humiliated. However, the next moment, the mocking smile on his face suddenly froze. Because he clearly felt a vast and boundless aura gushing out from the thin paper sword and instantly enveloped his body. It was a mighty sword style. Chunbachi seemed to see endless yellow water rushing towards him. He seemed to see the surging river at the junction of the South Jin Kingdom, and the Great River Kingdom leaving the ground and slapping towards his eyes. He was terrified and his Taoist heart suddenly became wet and cold. Only then did he understand that the paper sword was not ridiculous. It was him who was ridiculous. His pupils suddenly contracted and he wanted to save himself. However, the sword style on the thin paper had already descended between his eyebrows. Puff puff. There were 2 very slight puffs. 2 extremely thin bloodlines appeared on Chunbachi's eyes. 2 lines of blood were drawn across his black pupils and the whites of his eyes. After a moment, the 2 lines of blood rose up and down. Blood and the juice in his eyeballs flowed out. Pain and darkness occupied Chunbachi's consciousness. "Ah, what sword is this?" He covered his eyes and fell to the ground. He kept rolling in pain and let out a desperate howl like a dying beast. Yi Hongyu stood up and untied the slanted front of her green Taoist robe. She undid the belt of her underwear and put the paper sword between her fingers against her soft skin. Feeling the paper sword against her delicate skin, she became extremely calm. Looking at Chunbachi who was rolling under her feet, she said softly, "I know you like to see my body. My clothes are unbuttoned now," she said. Chunbachi covered his face and howled in pain. Blood and gelatin-like liquid seeped through his fingers. Yi Hongyu looked at him and said calmly, "It's a pity that you can't see it anymore." Late that night in early summer, Chunbachi, the former commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, was attacked and blinded. The once proud Tao addict Yi Hongyu, who was later forgotten, ignored, humiliated and hurt, left Peach Mountain under the cover of the night. No one knew where she went after that. A few days later, the Divine Hall delegation that went to Chong, and city of the Tang Empire, returned to West Hill. According to normal calculations, the West Hill delegation should have returned a few days earlier. However, for some reason, the delegation took a detour to the South Jin Kingdom and was delayed. The carriage slowly drove on the steep but not dangerous stone path of the West Hill Divine Palace. The deacons and officials in the delegation all noticed that the atmosphere in the Divine Hall was a little strange today. Wherever the luxurious black carriage with gold embroidery passed, the people in the divine hall would retreat and then respectfully kneel by the side of the road to salute. However, there was something else in their expressions other than awe. Chang Lishue, the priest of the Revelation Department, lifted the curtains and looked at the people kneeling under the green trees to welcome the great divine priest. He could not help but frown when he saw the uneasy expressions on their faces. Did something really happen? He muttered to himself and then turned to look at the great divine priest of Revelation who was resting in the carriage. He respectfully asked, "I'll go and have a look." The great divine priest of Revelation was silent. The carriage of the delegation traveled between the cliffs and the temple. There was still a cliff's distance from the divine hall of Revelation. Chang Lishue walked out of the carriage and looked at the cavalrymen of the divine hall, who were gathering in front of him. His face became a little gloomy. Chang Lishue walked in front of the cavalrymen of the divine hall. The cavalrymen of the divine hall all saluted, but because they were already wearing armor, no one got off their horses. He looked at Chanbachi, whose eyes were wrapped in bandages, and noticed that the former cavalry commander's face was extremely gloomy. He could not help but frown and ask, "What happened?" Chanbachi gritted his teeth and said, "Yi Hongyu betrayed the judicial department and the divine hall. I was ordered by Commander Luo to gather the cavalrymen and prepare to hunt her down in the world." Yi Hongyu betrayed the divine hall? Chang Lishue frowned slightly. His snow-like hair became even colder. Ever since the great divine priest of Revelation predicted that something big would happen to the judicial department, he had been very worried. The delegation specially went to the Sword Garret of the South Jin Kingdom for this matter. However, he did not expect that it would still happen. He looked at Chanbachi and said in a low voice, "I remember that your position as the cavalry commander was taken away from you in the wilderness last year. When was it restored?" "Just the day before yesterday. Luo Kadi is the commander of the Divine Guards. When can he intervene in the affairs of the judicial department?" Chang Lishue looked at Chanbachi expressionlessly and said, "You are just a subordinate of the judicial department. How dare you be rude to the Grand Master Yi Hongyu? Isn't that disrespecting your superior?" In the Divine Hall, as an official of the judicial department, Chanbachi was not afraid of the priest of the Revelation Department. Moreover, he was blinded by Yi Hongyu's paper sword. He was only thinking about revenge and how to capture Yi Hongyu back to the West Hill to torture and humiliate her. How could he care about Chang Lishue's attitude? He said coldly, "This is also the order of the great divine priest of judgment." Chang Lishue was silent. If this was really the order of the great divine priest of judgment, then he could not oppose it. At this moment, the luxurious carriage slowly drove over. An old voice came from the carriage. "The judicial department does not represent the divine hall. I'm back. There's one more chapter today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 437. The great divine priest of Revelation was in the carriage. The proud cavalrymen of Divine Hall could no longer sit on their horses. There was no such thing as not wearing armor in front of the great divine priest. They hurriedly dismounted and knelt in front of the carriage. Chanbachi's expression became extremely ugly. With the help of his attendants, he slowly knelt down. Yi Hongyu left the judicial department, but it doesn't mean that she betrayed the divine hall, because leaving is not betrayal. There was a sigh in the carriage. Chang Lishue felt the great divine priest of Revelation's disappointment and sadness, so he also became angry and sad. His snow-like hair fluttered faster and faster. He looked at Chanbachi, who was kneeling in front of the carriage, expressionlessly and said coldly, "Go and accept your punishment." Chanbachi suddenly raised his head and looked at Chang Lishue. If his eyes were not wrapped in bandages, he would have been able to see the resentment in his eyes. Last year in the Palace of the Wilderness, it was Chang Lishue who made him suffer the painful punishment of thorns. Now he was blind. It was Yi Hongyu who had betrayed the Divine Hall. Why should he accept the punishment? The mountain breeze of early summer blew by the palace on the cliff and lifted the curtain of the carriage, revealing an old hand. The hand landed on the window lattice and was slowly knocking. It was the hand of the great divine priest of Revelation. The cavalrymen and deacons of Divine Hall lowered their heads and did not dare to look at the hand. Chonbachi could not see it, so he still looked over there with a resentful expression. The old hand slowly knocked on the window. A faint aura shrouded the scene. When the people beside the carriage heard the light knocking sound, a strange and terrifying feeling welled up in their hearts. Someone saw Chonbachi's face and almost fell to the ground in horror. Chonbachi didn't feel or see anything, so he still looked resentful and even tried to defend himself. However, he opened his mouth but could not speak. He reached out to touch his mouth and found that his fingers touched something slightly wet and sticky. Then he felt something sweet in his mouth. Only then did he realize what had happened. The resentful expression on his face suddenly turned into incomparable horror and despair. His tongue was gone. There was only blood and minced meat in his mouth. Seeing Chonbachi's mouth dripping with pus and blood, the crowd was terrified. Someone could not help but exclaim. Several cavalrymen of Divine Hall subconsciously wanted to step forward, but suddenly realized that this must be the punishment of the great divine priest in the carriage. They trembled and stopped. The voice of the great divine priest of Revelation rang in the carriage again. You shouldn't have spoken. Can't talk, but you have to pass the message on behalf of someone else. Then don't talk anymore. After dealing with the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, the luxurious carriage continued to move towards the 4 magnificent Divine Halls at the top of Peach Mountain without any delay. In the dark carriage, the great divine priest of Revelation quietly looked at the early summer scenery of Peach Mountain. After a long silence, he suddenly said, I don't want to and shouldn't care about the affairs of the judicial department, but now it seems that I have to care. So I have to. Chung Lishua was silent. Looking at the old and tired face of the great divine priest of Revelation, he suddenly had a strong dislike for the bigwig on the seat of heavenly black jade. The carriages of the diplomatic corps had already dispersed. Only the black gold carriage of the great divine priest of Revelation was left. It slowly drove to the highest point of the Divine Hall, and came to the solemn black Divine Hall. The carriage seemed extremely small and lonely in front of the huge and magnificent Divine Hall. However, everyone who saw the carriage, no matter which deacon of the Divine Hall they were from, was shocked and awed. They were awed by the great divine priest of Revelation in the carriage. They were shocked that the great divine priest of Revelation actually appeared in front of the Divine Hall of Judgment. For countless years, the 3 most honorable great divine priests in the West Hill Divine Palace would never enter other divine halls because of their respect for each other and their own pride. People knelt before the stone steps of the Divine Hall, beside the stone pillars and by the road. They looked at the carriage anxiously, not knowing what had happened today. They saw the old great divine priest of Revelation slowly walk out of the carriage, up the stone steps, and into the black divine hall of judgment. Many people exclaimed in their hearts. The great divine priest of Revelation was very old and very thin. However, when he walked into the divine hall of judgment, he seemed very tall, as if he was about to touch the top of the divine hall of judgment. He walked on the flat stone ground, and all the people of the judicial department knelt down to greet him. No matter what the arrival of the great divine priest of Revelation meant to the judicial department, no one except the great divine priest of judgment was qualified to express their emotions. The great divine priest of Revelation walked into the divine hall of judgment and stood in front of the empty and monotonous hall. Looking at the bead curtain in the distance, he stopped and did not move forward. He came to talk to someone, so he wanted to walk into the divine hall of judgment. However, if he continued to walk into the divine hall, the bad-tempered guy behind the bead curtain would definitely think that he was looking for a fight. The great divine priest of West Hill was also a human being, and a human being must have emotions. The great divine priest of Revelation looked at the figure on the seat of heavenly black jade in the distance and said, I went to the South Gene Kingdom and brought back someone's ashes. The bead curtain in the depths of the divine hall moved without any wind, vaguely revealing the seat of heavenly black jade. The great divine priest of judgment held his chin in his hand and looked down without saying anything. The great divine priest of Revelation shook his head and said, You shouldn't do these things. The great divine priest of judgment still did not look up and said indifferently, "So what? Under Haotian and above the seat of heavenly God, do I still need to lower my head to Lu Bai?" After a long silence, the great divine priest of revelation said, "Before senior brother of light left, you did not need to lower your head. But after he left, you could only sit on the seat of heavenly black jade. Your head was originally lowered." The great divine priest of light's escape from the secluded pavilion caused a great shock in the West Hill Divine Palace. Few people knew that this old man, who was known as the strongest divine priest of light in hundreds of years, had pushed down the confinement built by the great divine priest of judgment with his natal divine power. But almost no one knew that the old man had pushed down the confinement and brought great harm to the great divine priest of judgment. After such a long time, the great divine priest of judgment still could not leave the seat of heavenly black jade. The great divine priest of revelation naturally knew. That was why he said that. The great divine priest of judgment sat on the seat of heavenly black jade that seemed to be condensed from the blood of thousands of people. He supported his chin with his hand and seemed to be thinking, but his violent and powerful head was indeed lowered. He slowly raised his head, and his deep eyes were full of indifference and violence. He looked outside the bead curtain and saw the great divine priest of revelation standing far away. He said, "I can raise my head at any time." In the empty and chilling black Taoist temple, a gust of wind suddenly rose. The people of the West Hill Divine Palace did not know what had happened in the Divine Hall of Judgment. They did not know what the great divine priest of revelation had said and done after entering the Divine Hall of Judgment, nor did they know what this historic meeting meant. They only heard the sound of the wind. The sound of the violent wind was even more terrifying than the hurricane on the east sea of the Kingdom of Song. It was as if countless giants were roaring and fighting. A storm swept out from the divine hall, blowing the gravel on the stone steps and hitting the stone pillars. People knelt on the ground in fear, but they could not stabilize their bodies at all. After a long time, the sound of the wind stopped, and so did the wind. The great divine priest of revelation walked out of the divine hall of judgment. His body was still stable, and his expression was still calm, but the wrinkles around his eyes seemed to have deepened. People watched in awe as the great divine priest of revelation walked down the stone steps. They found that he did not enter the carriage, but walked to the highest point of Peach Mountain, the holiest white Taoist temple. They were shocked and guessed. The great divine priest of revelation left the divine hall of judgment. He did not return to his own divine hall. Instead, he walked to the place where Haotian Taoism was supreme in the world. The highest and holiest white Taoist temple belonged to the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace. People did not know why the great divine priest of revelation went to see the great divine priest of judgment first, and then the hierarch lord. Similarly, they could not see with their own eyes what happened in the sacred white temple. All they heard was countless thunders coming from the white temple and resounding throughout the entire Peach Mountain. There was a light curtain in the deepest part of the white divine hall. The light curtain was composed of the purest Haotian divine flame. It contained unimaginable power and pressure. The light curtain represented Haotian's rule over the world. A figure landed on this holy screen of divine radiance. The figure on the light curtain was extremely tall. It was as if his feet were on the earth, and his head was above the blue sky, forcibly separating heaven and earth. Every word the figure said was like a bolt of lightning. That was the supreme ruler of Haotian Taoism in the world, the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace. The great divine priest of revelation bowed slightly to the giant figure on the light curtain. A voice sounded from behind the light curtain. "Revelation, you think too much." This voice was very calm, but when it passed through the holy screen of light, it caused the light to tremble slightly. Then it turned into the sound of thunder above the ninth heaven. The great divine priest of revelation looked at the giant figure and said calmly, "The Tao addict is the future of the divine hall. Those stupid people actually forced her away. I can't accept it. Hierarch Lord, you kept silent on this matter. In my opinion, it is also very stupid." The great divine priest of West Hill had a high and special status. However, it was still unimaginable for him to say that the hierarch lord was stupid. What was even more unimaginable was that the hierarch lord behind the light curtain was not angry after hearing this. Instead, he fell into a long period of thinking. The Tao addict can't return to the temple. I know. She is already useless. Maybe. The divine hall needs power. She can still be power. Revelation said expressionlessly, I can see further than you. After the great divine priest of light left, the great divine priest of revelation was naturally the one who could see further and more accurately in the whole Peach Mountain. This was something that even the gigantic figure in the boundless light had to admit. Maybe you are right. The thunder gradually stopped. Revelation left. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 438. The commander of the West Hill Divine Palace Divine Guards, Luokadi, was a tall middle-aged man. When he put on his armor, he looked like a mobile metal fortress. However, when he knelt in front of that screen of light, in front of that enormous figure, he was as humble as a dwarf, as if he was a thin and weak servant. Because he was the most loyal servant of the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace. He was the guard dog of the Peach Mountain of the West Hill Divine Palace. The Divine Hall needs power, more than ever before. Since the redfish has left, you'll be responsible for taking her back. If she no longer has any power, then I'll allow you to kill her for the dignity of the Divine Hall. Afterwards, you'll have to find some other kind of power. The hierarch lord stood in the light and said calmly. Luokadi kowtowed like a collapsing mountain. The great divine priest of revelation returned to his throne. He gently stroked the throne made of sunflower vines with his old palms, and looked at the hundreds of deacons and officials of the revelation department kneeling on the ground of the divine hall. The wrinkles on his face were as deep as the cracks on the cliffs of Peach Mountain. Chang Lishua waved his hand to dismiss the people who came to greet the great divine priest. Then he walked to the great divine priest and said in a low voice, It has happened after all. The great divine priest of revelation said, This is not the big event that I have predicted. Chang Lishua was shocked and speechless. If the Tao addict's betrayal of the Peach Mountain was not a big event, then what was the big event that the great divine priest predicted would happen to the judicial department? That really big event has not happened yet. The great divine priest of revelation said tiredly, All the fates in the world are predetermined by Haotian. The wheel of fate in the Buddhism sect actually means the same thing. What should happen is destined to happen, but it will happen later. Perhaps it was because of tiredness, or because of the continuous meetings with the great divine priest of judgment and the hierarch lord. The wrinkles around the great divine priest of revelation's eyes became more and more frightening. Chang Lishua looked at the wrinkles around the old man's eyes and felt worried. But he did not dare to ask directly. He asked tentatively, Where is Yi Hongyu now? The great divine priest of revelation said with a smile, This kind of thing does not need to be predicted. Since the Tao addict has left the West Hill, she must have gone to Chang'an. Chang Lishua's expression changed slightly. He didn't understand why the great divine priest was so sure. The Haotian divine light shines on the world. Where else can she live except in Chang'an? The great divine priest of revelation sighed and then said with a smile, Fortunately, Chang'an is a good city. We can see and learn some interesting things. Chang Lishua listened to the great divine priest's evaluation of Chang'an city and suddenly thought of his experience at the side gate of the academy. He frowned slightly and said, That is indeed an interesting city. He Mingqi actually sensed Ning Kei's divine skill earlier than me when Ning Kei fought with Lu Yiqing at the side gate of the academy. He Mingqi was the disciple of Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang. At the side door of the academy, Ning Kei had slashed at Lu Yiqing with his blade and the divine light had shone brightly. The cultivators present could not understand it at all. Only Chang Lishua and He Mingqi had reacted. Chang Lishua crashed through the wall of the carriage. He Mingqi crushed the carriage wheel. Chang Lishua was the Grand Master of the Revelation Department of the West Hill Divine Palace. It was not surprising that he could judge Ning Kei's divine skill so quickly. How could He Mingqi do the same? Recalling the scene at that time, Chang Lishua frowned and said, I can confirm that He Mingqi's state should be higher than mine. He is definitely not as weak as the rumors say. For hundreds of years, the greatest wish of the West Hill Divine Palace has been to invite the South School of Haotian back. Other than the boring dignity and reputation, of course, it is also because the people in the South School are extraordinary. Since younger brother Qingshan is the nation master of Tang, how can his successor be as weak as the rumors say? The great divine priest of revelation said slowly, I don't know how the Tao addict's trip to Chang and will affect the relationship between the Divine Hall and the South School. After all, it is a matter for the future. Chang Lishua thought about what had happened in the Divine Hall and the attitudes of the Hierarch Lord and the great divine priest of judgment. He said bitterly, I think it will be difficult for the Tao addict to return to Peach Mountain. The great divine priest of revelation shook his head and said, she will come back eventually. Chang Lishua was puzzled and said, why are you so sure? The great divine priest of revelation sighed and said, if she doesn't return to Peach Mountain, how can the destined event of the judicial department happen? Oh! Summer came to West Hill and so did Chang'an. The early summer in Chang'an was not unbearably hot. However, the sun in the sky was so hot that people began to feel annoyed. The bluestone slabs in the afternoon began to heat up. The renovation of the Yanming Lake was still going on. In order to finish the project before the arrival of summer, the construction team greatly accelerated under the pressure of money and the Fish Dragon gang. From morning to night, the sound of knocking and grinding echoed in the house by the lake. Fortunately, the original residents had already moved away. Otherwise, they would be tortured by the noise as the weather got hotter. Who knew what kind of conflicts would occur? As time went by, the project entered the final stage. Ning Ke took the tactical array drawing carefully drawn by Seventh Sister and began to go deep into the construction. After all, the money was in place. Mr. Chi of the Fish Dragon gang was too famous. Therefore, although the construction workers thought that Ning Ke's design was unreasonable, they did not make too much resistance. The renovation of the house by the lake gradually took shape, and Seventh Sister's tactical array gradually took shape. Then it was hidden among the flowers and plants on the white walls. The project was not finished. Ning Ke and Sang Sang still lived in the old brush pin shop. Knowing that they were going to move, the merchants on Lin 47th Street were relieved, but they could not help but feel a little sad. They thought that if this bigwig left, the men in black from the Fish Dragon gang would definitely not volunteer to maintain the security here, and the government runners of the Chang and local government would definitely not come here several times a day. Ning Ke did not know what people were thinking. He was really busy these days. He had to study in the back of the mountain of the academy, keep an eye on the renovation of the lakeside, and often go to the palace. The purpose of entering the palace, of course, was to enter the small wooden building. He had to shoulder the safety of the whole Chang'an city, and it was related to his plan. Therefore, he had to get familiar with the God-stunning array as soon as possible. Everyone praised his talent in Talisman Taoism, and Talisman Taoism was originally an interlinked skill. According to reason, he should be able to master the formation that his master Yen Sei left for him very soon. However, it was a pity that his talent seemed to be wasted too much on Talisman Taoism and various other skills, and he didn't leave much for the formation. However, Ning Ke had never been a person who gave up when faced with difficulties. Since he had to understand and master the big tactical array, these frustrations would not affect him at all. He took out the usual means of making up for his shortcomings with diligence and splitting books with a knife. As long as he had time, he would go to the palace to learn. His Majesty greatly appreciated his attitude and allowed him to enter the palace at any time. When he walked out of the small building wearily, the emperor would not let him go, but would take him to the imperial study. After entering the palace for more than 10 times, he became familiar with the leader of the Yulin royal guards, the bodyguards, the eunuchs and the palace maids, and even with the empress who ground ink in the imperial study every day. However, he was still not very familiar with the big tactical array of Chang'an city. However, this did not mean that he did not gain some benefits from it. Other than some benefits that could not be told to others, the biggest benefit he gained was the countless ancient trees by the Yanming Lake and the things that were continuously sent to the courtyard. The purchase document and the land deed of the house by the Yanming Lake were written with Qiao Xiaoshu's name. However, such a big movement could not be hidden from too many people. Liu was the first to know about this, so she gave Ningke a gift that was absolutely worthy of the identity of the princess of the Tang Empire. The numerous ancient trees that were transplanted by the Yanming Lake were all dug out from her own fiefdom. This was really a great deal, and it could not be bought even with money. His Majesty and the Empress also knew that he was building a new house. The Empress chose a lot of antiques from the palace treasury as a reward, while His Majesty rewarded Ningke with many calligraphy treasures. This was the only thing that Ningke was not satisfied with. Time gradually passed, and Chang'an City changed from early summer to midsummer. The cicadas in the academy became louder, and the heat in the city gradually rose. The renovation project by the Yanming Lake was officially completed. More than 10 houses that used to be separated were opened up, and the old walls that were softened by the lake air were repainted. The narrow alley between the houses was transformed into a stone path in the garden. Flowers and plants were in full bloom, which was very quiet and beautiful. The merchants on the Lin 47th Street plucked up their courage. Boss Wu and Aunt Wu, who sold the fake antique shop, took the lead and invited Ningke and Sang to a farewell feast. Their time on the Lin 47th Street was finally over. That night, Ningke and Sang moved to the house by the Yanming Lake. All the furniture had been bought by the brothers of the Fish Dragon Gang, so Sang did not have a headache about how to fill such a large yard. Under the strong request of Mr. Qi, Ningke kept the old brush pen shop. Anyway, Qiao Xiaoshu had waived his rent for many years. However, the old brush pen shop would not sell calligraphy anymore. Thinking about it, when the spring rain fell next year, there would be no young calligraphers in the shop called the old brush pen shop, and there would be no middle-aged people holding umbrellas outside the shop. Accompanied by cicadas and unknown insects, Ningke and Sang strolled on the stone path by the Yanming Lake. The beautiful houses behind them were their new homes. Countless ancient trees by the lake made the stone path and the houses extremely quiet. The lake wind passed through them, and the temperature seemed to be a lot lower. Compared with the stuffy heat in the streets of Chang'an, it was a completely different world. Sang thought of the picture of Ningke lying on the bamboo chair outside the back door in the summer 2 years ago, constantly soaking himself with well water and chatting with the neighbors. She could not help but feel that it was a lifetime ago. I never thought that we could live in such a big house. When they lived in a cave in Min Mountain, they lived in a tree house, and they lived in a small courtyard in the city of Wei. They had imagined for many times what kind of big house they would live in when they were rich. Now when they strolled in their own big house by the lake, they realized how shabby their imagination was. "It's good, isn't it?" Ningke asked. Sang nodded and said, "It's better than very good. Fuck, there's one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 439. Standing by the lake, Ningke looked back and saw towering green trees, white walls and black eaves. It was a noble scene. Thinking that this was his home, he could not help but sigh like Sang. He said with great satisfaction, "We will live in a bigger house in the future." Sang was a little surprised. She looked up and said, "Bigger houses than here can only be the Princess Mansion and the Imperial Palace." Ningke reached out and took her into his arms. He rubbed her head and said, "We often go to the Princess Mansion and the Imperial Palace. If we really want to live there in the future, I will ask His Majesty." Sang leaned against his chest and laughed happily. The light that leaked through the green leaves of the ancient trees suddenly became much lighter. Ningke looked up at the sky and saw a few large clouds floating in the sky above the treetops, blocking the blazing sun. He pushed Sang away and said, "Let's go boating." The little handmaiden was not too uncomfortable with the completely different treatment. She said, "Oh," and walked to the newly built simple mooring on the lake shore. The wooden stack, which was about a few feet long, extended to the Yanming Lake. There were 2 boats moored in front of the stack. There were oars at the stern and a canopy on the boat. They were very new, which was bought by Ning Quebec. The wooden oars cut through the white clouds and the blue sky on the lake surface. The lake waves gradually rose and swayed to the distance, disturbing the water plants in the clear water and startling the fish in the water plants. The boats left the pier and sailed to the center of the lake. There was a lotus field in the middle of Yanming Lake. Ning-Ke was half lying on the bow with his unbuttoned shirt collar. He lay in the shadow of the canopy and smelled the faint lotus fragrance in the wind. He closed his eyes comfortably. Sang Sang stood at the stern and slowly rowed the oars. "You should also close your eyes and feel it," Ning-Ke said. Sang Sang put down the oars in her hands and walked into the canopy. She leaned against him and closed her eyes. Her sparse eyelashes gently blinked and her yellowish hair trembled in the lake wind. "What do you feel?" "The wind on the lake is very cool." "I'm asking about the aura of heaven and earth. It seems a little stronger than on the shore." Sang Sang opened her eyes and looked at the lotus field not far away. Her thin brows furrowed. Ning-Ke took out the map from his arms and pointed at the Yanming Lake, which was about the size of a fingernail. He said, "This lake is the left branch of Chang and City. The imperial court dredged this lake last year. Nominally, the Ministry of Works responded to the request of the Chang and local government, but in fact, it was the daily maintenance of the God-stunning array by the Imperial Center Administration." Sang Sang was puzzled and asked, "Then will the Imperial Court agree to buy the house by the lake? I'm in charge of the array in Chang and City, not to mention this lake." Ning-Ke continued, "The reason why I sold everything I had to buy the lakeside house was because of this lake. The big tactical array in Chang and City has never been activated, but it has been operating slowly. Yanming Lake, as the left eye of Qi, naturally needs to gather some Qi of heaven and earth. Although the self-uniform power of heaven and earth is too strong, the concentration here cannot be too special, but it is good for cultivation." Sang Sang nodded, not really understanding. "The most important thing is, if I can really control the big tactical array in Chang'an City, I can connect the tactical array designed by Seventh Sister for us with the God-stunning array." Ning-Ke said, "At that time I don't need to activate the God-stunning array to startle the world. I also have enough ability to borrow the power of Chang and City and plant a lotus on someone." Sang Sang thought for a moment and said, "It sounds very difficult." Ning-Ke thought about the learning in the palace these days and said bitterly, "It's more difficult than very difficult." Sang Sang said, "Young master, I believe you can definitely do it." "I hope so, but there is not much time." Ning-Ke looked at the lotus field not far away and thought that the green lotus leaves would all turn into withered yellow leaves in autumn, and that person would also return to Chang'an. He could not help but fall silent. "Let's go to the lotus field over there," he said. Sang Sang stood up from beside him, walked to the stern and rowed again. "Let's row." Ning-Ke's song sounded on the boat on the lake. Yanming Lake was a public forest land owned by the government and was not allowed to be sold. It was impossible for it to become Ning-Ke's private property. However, he had bought all the houses by the lake. The imperial court would not take it too seriously because of his status. Yanming Mountain on the south bank was not famous and there were very few tourists. Therefore, Yanming Lake was in fact the private lake of his house. There was only one boat floating on the beautiful lake. Sealing up such a beautiful scenery and turning it into a private garden that could only be enjoyed by themselves would cut off the opportunity for the people of Chang and to get close to it. Of course, it would seem a little unkind and even morally questionable. However, Ning-Ke and his handmaiden were originally nouveau riches and had never been kind people, so they did not care much about moral issues. The lotus field in the middle of the lake was planted by people hired by Ning Quebec. After these days, the lotus leaves were already lush and the flowers were in full bloom after being nourished by the lake mud. Sang Sang moved the oars, and the boat slowly sailed into the lotus field. As far as the eye could see, besides the green lotus leaves and pink lotus flowers, nothing else could be seen. It was as if they had entered a quiet maze, a graceful world that was completely different from the scorching summer. The round green lotus leaves were like cattail leaf fans lying on the surface of the water. They stretched out in midair and touched the walls of the boat from time to time, making a rustling sound. The lotus flowers were in full bloom by the side of the boat. The pink, white, soft and smooth petals were so close to the two that they could even clearly smell a faint fragrance. Ninkei leaned on the bow of the boat and looked at the lotus leaves that brushed past him. He held a cattail leaf fan in his hand and waved it gently. His eyes were slightly narrowed as he admired the beautiful scenery of the lotus field. At the same time, he meditated and cultivated. He used the qi cultivation method that he learned when he was in seclusion in the cliff cave to constantly breathe in and out the aura of heaven and earth between the lake and accumulate the Great Spirit in his body. The drop of liquid that was condensed by the Great Spirit in his body was now rounder and fuller. It looked like a drop of water rolling on the lotus leaves and could fall into the lake at any time. The boat went deep into the lotus field. The house by the lake and even the Yanming mountain on the south bank were all covered by the lotus leaves. Sang Sang put down the oars and sat beside Ning Quebec. She reached out to the side of the boat and picked a lotus head among the leaves. Her little hand slightly tore the fresh lotus that had not been formed for a long time and picked out the pale green lotus seed. She carefully peeled the lotus seed and picked out the thin lotus core inside, and then sent it to Ninkei's lips. Ninkei did not open his eyes and ate the lotus seed with her fingertips. When his mouth was full of fragrance, he suddenly opened his eyes and said, "The first lotus core is not bitter. Why bother to pick it out?" Sang Sang had already processed several lotus seeds and fed them all into his mouth. She did not listen to him and still carefully picked out the lotus core. "I heard that the lotus core can be used as medicine. We can't waste it," she said with her head down. Ninkei was speechless and said, "Anyway, we are a family with a big house now. Why do we have to be so thrifty? If you have the time, you might as well let me write a few more calligraphy pieces." Sang Sang thought for a while and thought it was true. She looked at the lotus core on her knees and made up her mind. She threw the lotus core into the lake and washed her hands in the lake water. Then she walked back to the stern. "Where are you going?" Ninkei looked at the boat swaying and asked in confusion. Sang Sang said, "When we go back, I will let you write a few more calligraphy pieces. I spent all my money to buy this house. Even if the palace gave me a lot of things, I still owe Mr. Qi a few thousand taels of silver last night." Ninkei said helplessly, "There is no hurry, right?" Sang Sang laughed and said, "I'm just kidding. Tell me, where are we going at this time?" Ninkei said, "Just paddle." The boat swam freely in the lotus field. Ninkei opened the package beside him and took out the small iron can. He carefully touched the deep straight lines on it, and found that he really did not have the ability of sixth brother. He casually threw the small iron can into the lake. These days, sixth brother made a total of more than 30 small iron cans, and now he was still making them in the back of the mountain of the academy. As long as there was time, there would be a continuous supply. The small iron pot was filled with enough weight of scrap iron, which increased the power of the test. Moreover, when thrown into the lake, it could be guaranteed that it would not float. The relatively troublesome thing was the fire fu in the small iron pot. Although Ninkei's psyche power was much stronger than that of ordinary cultivators, it still made him feel a little tired to make more than 30 fu papers with the most powerful talisman power. Sang Sang rowed. He leaned against the bow of the boat and threw the small iron pot into the lake from time to time, ignoring the fish on the lotus leaves. The boat swam freely and he threw it casually. This scene seemed to be comfortable and natural, but in fact, he firmly remembered the position of the small iron pot in the lake. The boat moved among the lotuses and the green leaves. The lake water suddenly broke, making a clear and pleasant sound. It was like frogs jumping from the boat into the lake from time to time. When the boat sailed out of the lotus field, the small iron pot had completely sunk into the lake. At this time the sky was covered by rain and clouds, and no one knew when it was dusk. Ninkei stood at the bow of the boat and looked at the shore that was getting closer and closer. There was a steep but not high Yanming mountain on the shore. He squinted his eyes and felt the lake breeze, which was much cooler than yesterday, caressing his cheeks. It was very comfortable. The boat reached the south bank, and the two went ashore into the forest. They picked up the grass along the way and finally reached the peak of Yanming Mountain. The peak was not high, but they could overlook the lake. Ninkei looked at the courtyard on the north bank of the lake and looked at the looming lines between the trees and eaves. He silently compared it with the tactical array left by Seventh Sister in his heart and confirmed that there was no difference. If Haotian can give me enough time to connect this lake with the God-stunning array, then I believe that I can kill anyone I want here. Just after he said this, it seemed that Haotian could no longer tolerate his arrogance. A light suddenly flashed in the depths of the dense rain clouds in the sky, and then there was a rumbling thunder. The rain fell without warning and instantly turned into countless water curtains, covering the entire Chang and city. Yinming Lake and Yinming Mountain were silent in the rain. At the moment when the lightning flashed and thunder roared, Sang Sang opened the big black umbrella as fast as she could. Ning Ke looked up at the black umbrella and said, "It is easy to be struck to death with an umbrella in a thunderstorm." Sang Sang said, "You said that when we were young, but we were not struck to death." Ning Ke sighed and said, "It is indeed a very magical world. Then close your eyes and feel it." The rain was pouring. Thunder and lightning intertwined. Sang Sang stood on the edge of the cliff, facing the turbulent lake water. She closed her eyes and held the handle of the big black umbrella tightly. After some time, Ning Ke asked with a serious expression, "How do you feel?" Sang Sang opened her eyes, which were brighter than the lightning in the rain clouds. "I can feel everything. That's all for today. See you tomorrow. I am really not used to writing during the day. My eyes are always blurred, but it seems to be efficient. I hope it can continue." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 440. Sang Sang was a little handmaiden. Sang Sang was not an ordinary handmaiden. She had an amazing memory. She could easily remember all the numbers she had seen since she started to count. This could be testified by the soldiers and civilians in the city of Wei. She was very smart. This could be testified by Chan Pippi, who had walked out of the old brush pen shop several times. Chan Pippi was a genius recognized by both Haotian Taoism and Chang, an academy. The reason why Sang Sang often seemed a little clumsy or even dull was not that her brain was not good. In Ning Ke's words, she was just a little lazy and did not want to think about many things. Ning Ke knew more about Sang Sang's special features than anyone else in the world, such as her intelligence and her unique ability. However, in the past 10 years, he had not thought about or touched these special features of Sang Sang. This was his instinctive choice, because he could not understand why he had picked up a little baby girl from a pile of corpses by the roadside of the wasteland in Hebei County. The baby girl seemed to be hiding some secrets, which made him feel a little scared. It was not until the great divine priest of light escaped from the West Hill and came to Chang and city and took Sang Sang as his disciple. Sang Sang became the next great divine priest of light in the West Hill Divine Palace. Ning Ke then realized that this was the mark of fate on Sang Sang. This was the lucky chance of the little baby girl. Fate and secrets had already appeared in front of him, so there was no more fear. He could only admit and accept it. In the past 6 months, Ning Ke no longer avoided it. Instead, he began to train or explore Sang Sang's potential and cultivation. Today, there was a thunderstorm by the Yinming Lake. Sang Sang stood on the edge of the cliff, holding the big black umbrella. She said that she felt everything. 2 years ago, on the journey from the city of Wei to Chang'an City, Liu Qingchen once told Ning Ke that when a cultivator first comprehended the range of the qi of heaven and earth that he could feel represented the aptitude of that cultivator. It could even predict which step he would take in the future. Some cultivators could feel a pond, and some could feel a lake. When the Sage of Sword Lu Bai was enlightened, he felt a big river. What Ning Ke felt was a warm ocean. However, he had never told anyone about this because even he did not believe that his cultivation potential was stronger than the Sage of Sword Lu Bai's. In fact, the various stories that happened during his cultivation journey proved that he was wrong. Sang Sang said that she had sensed everything, but it did not mean that she was more powerful than Lu Bai. It meant something else, something that only she and Ning Ke could understand. "You're trying it now?" Sang Sang handed him the big black umbrella. Ning Ke took the big black umbrella. His palms and the umbrella handle were full of rainwater. The psyche power was slowly released from his sense of perception and passed through his palm into the handle of the big black umbrella. Then it quietly covered the oil-stained surface of the big black umbrella. It passed through the majestic rainstorm and diffused towards Yanming Lake at the bottom of the cliff. Ningke also felt a lot. He sensed the lake that was jumping restlessly like boiling water after being hit by the storm. He sensed the lotus leaves in the lotus field that were rattling restlessly like drums. He sensed the frightened frogs under the lotus leaves. He sensed the small iron pots that looked like stones in the depths of the lake. Ningke looked up at the sky and tilted the black umbrella backward. The heavy rain immediately soaked his body. The dark clouds in the sky rolled and squeezed. After the dark clouds there were more dark clouds. Countless raindrops poured down from the layers of dark clouds, looking like countless old black snakes biting each other crazily. Suddenly, an extremely thick and straight bolt of lightning crossed the entire sky from the northwest of Chang'an City without warning. It instantly tore apart the rolling rain clouds. The thunder came soon after and exploded above Yanming Lake. Boom! It was unknown whether it was the power of the thunder or something else, but the water of Yanming Lake suddenly fluctuated. Water splashed everywhere and the lotus branches shook violently, as if they would break at any time. Ningke looked down at the surface of the lake that was surging like a fountain. He looked at the waves and broken branches that were gradually dispersing towards the shore. He suddenly said, "Yes." Sang Sang wiped the rain off her face and did not speak. After that terrifying bolt of lightning, the sky seemed to have officially begun to get angry. Bolts of lightning came one after another, illuminating Chang'an City, which was originally covered in darkness by the dark clouds. The dull thunder did not show any signs of stopping. The continuous explosions did not give the people in the city any chance to breathe. In the violent thunder, Ningke held the black umbrella and looked at the north shore of Yanming Lake. He said something, but because the thunder was too loud and the rain was too violent, only he could hear it. He pointed to the courtyard on the north shore and said, "Start from the courtyard." He pointed to the shaking lake and said, "Continue in the lake." Then he looked at Sang Sang and the Yanming Peak under his feet and said, "End here." Sang Sang took the big black umbrella from him and said, "Don't let him go up the mountain." Ningke said after a moment of silence, "I'll try my best. If I still can't kill him in the lake and don't let him go up the mountain, then I'll go down the mountain." Sang Sang said, "What about me if you go down the mountain?" Ningke said, "You watch me from the mountain." Sang Sang said, "I can help you. You can definitely help me, but that's before I go down the mountain. And I believe that there will be many people watching that day, such as second brother, so you'll be safe." After saying this, Ningke walked down the mountain. The heavy rain in midsummer came abruptly and left quickly without any reluctance. When Ningke and Sang Sang walked to the lake at the foot of the mountain, the rain stopped. After the rain stopped, they returned to the boat. Ningke picked up the boat with one hand and poured out the accumulated rainwater in the cabin. The boat wandered on the Yanming Lake that had calmed down again. After the heavy rain, the air on the lake became extremely clean and fresh. The heat of midsummer was swept away, and the lake wind was filled with the sweet smell of broken green branches. The boat sailed into a corner of the lotus field. Here, the lotus branches were broken, the lotus flowers were broken, and the lake water was turbid. It looked very miserable. No matter how powerful the thunder and lightning in the sky was, it could not cause such a scene. Some traces of iron slag could be vaguely seen on the broken lotus leaves floating on the lake. Ningke looked at the broken lotus branches in the lake and said with a smile, "Keep the broken lotus, and listen to the thunder." Tuyang City was located in the northeast border of the Tang Empire. It was near Min Mountain and the wilderness. Even in midsummer it was extremely cool. After the summer, the rain gradually increased, but thunder was rarely heard. There was more rain, but it didn't mean that people could dig lakes and plant lotuses like in the south. Only the general's mansion had a lotus pond in Tuyang City. Only a few people could see the wilted lotus. Naturally, not many people in this border town would lament about the wilted lotus like the poets and scholars. However, when the people in Tuyang City saw the broken Tang Empire cavalry in the meadow outside the city, they could not help but be shocked and even shocked to the point of speechlessness. For many years, The Tang Empire's army had not suffered any losses. The northeast border military led by General Xiahou had never lost a battle. Why was the cavalry outside the city a broken army? In fact, this was just a misunderstanding that was not good. The Tang Empire cavalry on the meadow outside Tuyang City did not lose the battle in the wilderness. It was just that after a long journey, their armor was stained with dust, their horses were tired, and the people were tired. Most importantly, all of their faces were filled with numbness. The team was filled with an atmosphere of decline, so they were mistaken for a broken army. The reason why the Tang Empire soldiers were numb was the desolate man in the forest not far away. The man's leather robe had long been tattered. Blood mixed with dust was smeared on the clothes that he had stolen from somewhere. He looked extremely tired and could even collapse at any time. It was such a seriously injured man who followed the Tang Empire cavalry from the depths of the wilderness to the outside of Tuyang City, and did not collapse. The Tang Empire cavalry looked at the man in the distance with numb expressions and even some reverence in their eyes. In the past few days, the man had been following the Tang Empire cavalry, ready to rush into the camp and assassinate General Xiahou. He had tried 17 times and failed 17 times, but he still persisted. It was not that the Tang Empire cavalry did not want to kill the man, but the man proved with his strength and perseverance that he was difficult to kill, especially when the Tang Empire soldiers did not want to pay the price of mutual destruction. Ambushes and counter-ambushes, ambushes and encirclement, happened continuously in this long journey and then ended in silence. The man could not kill General Xiahou. Xiahou and his invincible cavalry could not kill the man either. It had happened too many times. All the Tang Empire cavalry, even the proudest generals, were a little numb when faced with the powerful man who was like a beggar. The sound of hooves rang out and the vigilant cavalry parted to form a path. Xiahou galloped over and looked at Tang on the meadow in the distance without any emotion on his face. In the past few days, the Tang Empire cavalry had tried everything to lure and kill the powerhouse from the Devil's Doctrine. They had almost succeeded several times, but in the end the other party had escaped. Tang also had a few opportunities to successfully get close to Xiahou and force Xiahou to start a fierce battle with him. Xiahou was not fighting alone. He had countless cavalrymen as guards. So, in this continuous battle, Tang was ultimately at an absolute disadvantage. Now Tang was seriously injured and did not have the demeanor of a powerhouse from the Devil's Doctrine. He was more like a poor beggar. However, Tang was not dead, and Tang still insisted on killing him. Xiahou was also seriously injured. The armor made by the Academy on his body was finally destroyed by Tang's demonic blood-red broadsword the day before yesterday. Behind me is Tuyang City. Xiahou looked at Tang on the meadow in the distance and said indifferently, "You have no chance." Tang said, "I have said that you are old." Xiahou said, "I have also said that old and frail means nothing to you and me." Tang said, "The problem is that your heart is old. From the moment you decided to retire, you are really old. Old is weak. If Tuyang City was 100 miles away, you would definitely die in my hands." Xiahou was silent and found that what Tang said was right. "But I have Sunsoil City, and I have countless cavalrymen who are loyal to me." Xiahou said, "And you are only one person." Tang said, "If you could understand that fighting is ultimately a personal matter, maybe you would not have made so many mistakes and would not be as old as you are now." In midsummer, the grass was long and the eagles were flying. There were countless wounds on Tang's body. Blood was still dripping, falling on the grass and starting to burn. Xiahou covered his mouth with his fist and began to cough. There was blood flowing from his fingers, like an injured eagle on the rock wall. Eagles were generally called eagles. However, eagles could grow old but humans could not. And, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 441. 1,000 years ago, the desolate man was the master of the northern prairie of the mainland. So even today, the prairie was still called the wilderness. There were eagles on the prairie, So the desolate man was good at breeding eagles. Even though they were defeated by the Tang Empire and were forced to move north to the cold region in the far north, the desolate man still did not give up breeding eagles. Xiahou was a desolate man, so was Tang, so they were familiar with breeding eagles. Looking at Tang, who was dressed in rags and dirty like a beggar, on the meadow by the mountain forest in the distance, Xiahou suddenly remembered his experience of training an eagle when he was a child. He remembered the scene of the young and tender eagle teetering on the iron frame but refusing to lower its head stubbornly. From the depths of the wilderness to the south, he had been fighting for thousands of miles. He had always been very confident, thinking that he was torturing Tang like an eagle. He used Tang's anger and hatred to make Tang unable to close his eyes and use all of his energy to fight day after day. Xiahou had thought that he was about to succeed. He saw with his own eyes that Tang's genuine qi was draining and his energy was getting tired. His rock-hard body became ordinary and could be injured. He thought that Tang's blood would be drained during the long journey, and he would finally fall down like the young eagle. However, he did not expect that Tang did not fall down. Instead, he felt an unprecedented fatigue, weakness, and even a trace of tiredness in the deepest part of his body. Could it be that he was the eagle that was being tormented? Xiahou kept coughing and blood kept spilling from his fist that was stuck to his lips. But his expression was still indifferent and calm, and his deep-set eyes were as cold as ice. Being old was not scary. No matter on the prairie or on the cliff by the hot sea, only an old eagle was a real eagle. He put down his fist and took out a handkerchief to wipe the blood stains at the corner of his mouth. He looked at Tang in the distance expressionlessly and said, "Your perseverance surprised me, but it was just a surprise. After all, you are not your teacher. Before you cross that threshold, you will never be a threat to me." Tang looked down at the long grass at his feet that had been set on fire by his blood. The continuous battles had seriously injured him. The seemingly inconspicuous Tang cavalrymen, with their strong military discipline and tactical organization, had caused him a lot of trouble. As the genuine qi in his body was gradually exhausted, his seemingly indestructible body finally bled under those sabers and arrows. The devil's doctrine had withered. As a world wayfarer of the devil's doctrine, he was more like a loner. Not to mention, compared to the countless Taoist priests of the West Hill Divine Palace, even compared to the traitor Xiahou, he seemed so weak. In a sense, the current devil's doctrine was him. He was the devil's sect. He was the last spirit and pride of the devil's sect, so he could not fall. Therefore, even though he was seriously injured and could not see any hope, he still silently fought with Xiahou and the thousands of Tang cavalrymen until they reached Tuyang City. Tang raised his head and looked at Xiahou, who was surrounded and protected by countless cavalrymen. He said, "Look at your body that seems strong but is actually like rotten wood. Ask your heart that seems strong but is actually like mud. If I really can't threaten you, why would you turn around and say these words to me at this time?" Xiahou was silent for a long time and then said, "You can't follow me back to Chang'an. The Central Plains is the human world shrouded by Hao Yin's divine light. Even heaven can't tolerate you. What can you do?" As the last and strongest survivor of the devil's doctrine, Tang could live freely in the wilderness and face Yisu. But he was very clear that if he really went to the Central Plains, he would inevitably face the endless pursuit of the powerhouses of the West Hill Divine Palace. In the end, he would die. "I really can't enter the Central Plains." Tang looked at Tuyang City not far away and said, "I don't even dare to enter that city. But I have already hurt you. I have made you weak and nervous, so I know you are destined to die." Xiahou said, "Why do you say these meaningless words? I won't do meaningless things and I won't say meaningless things. I am definitely not the only one in the world who wants to kill you. When you leave the military camp and return to Chang'an, or when you retire, the ghosts in the steamer and the little ghosts who died on the road will come to your back and demand your life. Those ghosts will thank me for chasing you all the way, and I will also thank them for chasing you to death." Tang finally nodded to Xiahou and said, "I wish you a happy retirement and a wonderful death." After saying this, he turned and left the meadow, disappearing into the forest. Xiahou silently looked at the deserted meadow and the forest gently blown by the summer wind. Without saying anything more, he gently lifted the reins and rode toward Tuyang City. The wind blowing from the wilderness stirred the forest, the deep grass, the military flag on top of Tuyong City, and the white hair that peeked out from the edge of his helmet. Since ancient times, famous generals were like beauties. They were not allowed to see their white hair, but his hair had already turned white. The newly renovated house by Yinming Lake welcomed the first group of guests. Princess Li Yu, her stepson, and Situ Ilan. Ning Ke welcomed Situ Ilan's arrival very much. He had no problem with the poor savage prince, but he inevitably felt that the visit of Princess Li Yu was a little troublesome. He had a good relationship with Li Yu, but he was very clear that she would definitely bring him trouble. Sure enough, when only he and Li Yu were left in the quiet study, trouble came. Outside the carved window of the study, there were several old trees shading the summer. The breeze was pleasant, and even the sound of cicadas in the forest was not annoying. Li Yu held a bowl of herbal tea and looked at the faintly visible lake view outside the window. She smiled and said, "The cicadas make the forest quieter. This house is really good. No wonder a miser like you is willing to spend so much money." Ning Ke sighed and thought, "Is this really the place to start talking?" He walked to Li Yu's side and said, "Thank you, Your Highness, for sending these big trees. The old trees in the house by Yinming Lake were all from Li Yu's royal fief. These trees were very valuable. The cost of transporting them out of the mountain and back to Chang and city was a terrifying figure. The most important thing was that there were many rare ancient trees that could not be bought even with money. Ning Ke was indeed a person of high status, but Li Yu was the dignified princess of the Tang Empire. She did not need to carefully please him, and such a heavy gift naturally had to be returned. After all, they are just wild things and not worth much. Li Yu walked to the display shelf in the study and looked at the antiques on the shelf. Her expression changed slightly and she said with a chuckle, "When I was a child, I asked my father for this brush washer, but he said he gave it to her, so it was not good to get it back. I did not expect to see it in your study today." Ning Ke looked at the stone brush washer and said, "If you like it, you can take it." Li Yu said with slight mockery, "Why should I take what she gave you?" In Chang'an City, only Li Yu and her brother dared to call the Empress her. Of course, this could only be a private address. Obviously, Li Yu did not care about letting Ning Ke see her true attitude towards the Empress. Ning Ke did not reply. Li Yu looked at him and said with a smile, "I heard that you have been to the palace often recently. You must be very familiar with her?" Ning Ke said, "Indeed, I am much more familiar with her than before." Li Yu asked, "What kind of person do you think she is?" Ning Ke answered directly, "I don't know." After a moment of silence, Li Yu said with a self-mocking smile, "I have been opposing her for so many years, but I have never been able to see what she is thinking, let alone you." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Why think so much?" Li Yu took a sip of the herbal tea in the cup and frowned slightly. Then she smiled and said, "It's delicious. Is this the mulberry tea made by Sang Sang? I have heard her mention it several times, but this is the first time I have tasted it." Listening to Her Highness talking about family matters, Ning Ke suddenly felt much more relaxed. He was prepared to explain how to make mulberry tea and emphasize that it was his own invention. However, he did not expect that Li Yu's next sentence would come so quickly. The atmosphere took a sudden turn for the worse. "My thoughts are very simple, you know." Li Yu looked into Ning Ke's eyes calmly and persistently. Ning Ke did not avoid her gaze and said, "I have also told you my thoughts." Li Yu said, "I know that you have some problems with the imperial military." Ning Ke said, "I admit it, but the problems can always be solved, and I don't need to care about them. I don't think that after you killed Huang Xing and Yushuizhu, you can still have a good talk with Xia Ho and let those old generals in the military think that you are kind and harmless." Li Yu said, "These problems cannot be solved. Maybe you really don't need to care about them, but if you want to continue doing something, you have to care about them." Ning Ke said, "Of course I will not admit what Her Highness said. As for the little friction between me and General Xia Ho, I believe it will not last for too long. Everyone knows that Xia Ho is on the Empress's side." Li Yu said, "The Empress is trying to win you over because she does not want the dispute between Xia Ho and the academy to continue to expand. But are you willing?" Ning Ke thought to himself, I also know that the Empress is Xiaoho's sister. Eldest brother had already told him, so he would not reveal this big secret in front of Li Yu. Li Yu said, if the hatred between you and Xiaoho is only the conflict in the wilderness, since Mr. First has already set the tone, I hope you are willing. Ning Ke frowned slightly and did not understand why she would choose to stand on the same side as the Empress. Li Yu said in a low voice, only some young generals in the army are willing to be loyal to me. Hua Shangyue leads the Hebei Prefecture army, and it is too difficult for him to accumulate military merits. With his current qualifications, it is impossible for him to take over Xiaoho's position in the northeast border military. But since Xiaoho is willing to retire, it is a good thing for me. So I do not want other things to interfere with this process. This explanation was very naked and sincere. Even Ning Ke could not help but be slightly stunned. After a moment he sighed and said, this kind of thing is really boring. Li Yu said with slight mockery, you are indeed a student of the headmaster of the academy. You even feel that the throne of the Tang Empire is boring. Ning Ke said, I have told you before, don't pay too much attention to the attitude of the person who entered the human realm from the academy. I have teachers, senior brothers and sisters, His Majesty in the palace, the nation master in the temple, Huang Yang in the temple, and Su Shi and the other old generals in the army. Whether the throne should be passed to your brother or the prince born by the empress is ultimately these people's opinion. Li Yu looked at him quietly and suddenly said, but have you ever thought that whether it is father, the headmaster of the academy, or the old generals in the army, they will all leave one day? Why does the academy want you to enter the human realm? Why does father think so highly of you? Why is Su Shi so vigilant against you? Actually, it is all because of the same reason. No one can resist the fate of Haotian. As time passes, the Tang Empire will eventually lose them. Some people are worried that you will become an evil eagle without the suppression of the hunter and harm the world after they pass away. But the headmaster of the academy and father are silent. They want to protect you, torture you, and polish you. They want you to turn from a young eagle into an eagle and protect the Tang Empire without them. After struggling and thinking, there is still one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 442. He left the city of Wei, came to Chang'an, entered the academy, and finally entered the back mountain. But before he could learn anything, Ning Ke had to take the students from the front yard to the frontier fortress in the north of Yan Kingdom. Now that he thought about it, this must be the result of the discussion between the emperor and the academy. When he came to the wilderness, he received the news from the Imperial Center Administration that the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine deep in the wilderness was opened and the tomes of arcane appeared. Ning Ke had to go north. After so many tests and even tortures, he finally inherited the mantle of youngest uncle, which was the embodiment of the will of the headmaster of academy. His Majesty and Master Yen Sei did not hesitate to hand over the big tactical array of Chang unto him. These things all proved the trust and expectation of the imperial court and the academy in him. Ning Ke was very clear about this, so he was not surprised when he heard what Li Yu said. But he had never thought about it carefully, because as indifferent and ruthless as he was, he still felt that those deaths were sad things. I don't think that will happen in a short period of time, Ning Ke said. Li Yu said bitterly, maybe what I said is not pleasant to hear. Sometimes when I think about the future I feel nervous and sad. But people will grow old and die. My father is in the prime of his life, but his health is not as good as it looks. Before I married the Golden Tent, I asked the Imperial Academy of Medicine about my father. My father was seriously injured years ago, and his condition has been worsening ever since. The medicine can't do anything about it, so he often coughs. Ning Ke thought of the scene when he was with His Majesty in the imperial study. He thought of those inexplicably happy curses of idiots and the occasional coughs. He was silent. Although Su Shi is a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts, he is already very old. And the whole world knows that he has an old lung disease. No matter how he nourishes himself, it can't be cured. The headmaster of Academy is the most stable and powerful mountain in the Tang Empire. Seems that he will stay green forever. But he has lived for more than 100 years. Can he live forever? Li Yu looked at Ning Ke and said calmly, life, old age, sickness and death are irreversible. The headmaster of Academy and my father are thinking about the future. What right do we have not to think about it? Ning Ke took the cold mulberry tea from her hand and walked back to the desk. He put his hands on the edge of the desk and thought for a moment. He said, at least there are many years. Li Yu frowned slightly. Ning Ke said, the headmaster and His Majesty can live for at least another 10 or 20 years. At that time I will be much stronger than I am now. Perhaps eldest brother or second brother can take the position after the headmaster leaves. I think the Tang Empire will be as strong as it is now, so I don't think there is anything to think about now. Li Yu said, I have told you before that my request to you is very simple. When the succession of the Tang Empire requires the Academy's help, please stand by my side. Ning Ke did not turn around. He looked up at the ancient trees outside the window and the Yanming Lake in the distance. He thought about how the lake looked like in winter Xiaohou, and the inseparable blood relationship between Xiaohou and the Empress. He said, if that day comes, I will not stand on the Empress' side. Li Yu was somewhat satisfied with his answer, but she still regretted that he did not directly express his attitude. Looking at his back, a faint look of disappointment appeared on her beautiful face. She sighed softly and said, if I had known that things would develop like this, I would not have let you go. Ning Ke turned around and said, at that time you and I were from different worlds, and I was not a person who was willing to be caught. So don't feel regretful. Li Yu walked slowly to him and looked into his eyes, as if she wanted to see something. If I didn't catch you, I could stay with you. I have been thinking, if I did not stand up beside the bonfire, would we have stayed in the same world? Ning Ke recalled the bonfire at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road, the maidservants and fairy tales beside the bonfire, as well as those conversations. He curled his lips and said, the key is that the price you gave me was too low. Hearing his words, Li Yu clearly sensed that he was a little emotional and evasive, a little regretful and a little secretly happy. She smiled and said, if I had known that your little handmaiden would become the great divine priest of light of the West Hill Divine Palace, I would definitely have offered the highest price. Ning Ke smiled and asked, what's the highest price? In the eyes of women in the world, Ning Ke's appearance was considered fresh, but not handsome. He was extremely cute when he smiled, especially with his freckles and dimples. The girls in the House of Red Sleeves were fascinated by the young man's dimples, freckles and freshness. At this time his smile was reflected in the depths of Li Yu's eyes. She subconsciously raised her hand and touched the dimples on his face. She said, your freckles are getting lighter. Ning Ke felt the smooth fingertips on his face and was slightly absent-minded. He said, Sang Sang often used a lot of powder in Shinjinji Cosmetics store, so she would give some to me. Is that the reason? Li Yu suddenly came to her senses and quickly withdrew her hand. I suffered a loss. Ning Ke looked at her and said seriously. Li Yu's cheeks were slightly red, but there was no shyness in her bright eyes. She slightly raised her head and joked, if you are not afraid of Song Song's jealousy, you can touch it back. Ning Ke coughed and with great difficulty suppressed the urge to reach out and touch her smooth and slightly pointed chin. He put his hands behind his back and asked, speaking of which, where is Sang Sang? She must be telling stories to Xiaoman. Li Yu rolled her eyes and said, I won't tease you anymore. I'm going to find her. Ning Ke and Situ Ilan walked along Yanming Lake and chatted casually in the cool lake breeze. They only had to be careful to brush away the irritating willow branches that came at their faces from time to time. Situ Ilan was a little disappointed because she did not participate in the spring war in the wilderness. But this disappointment was a little absurd in Ning Ke's eyes. I don't know what you are thinking. What's the point of fighting? You read books in the academy every day, and learn needlework in the mansion every day. Don't you feel bored? I am a man, not a girl. If I were you, I would definitely not feel bored. That's not what you said when we were in the Blue Water Battalion. The two walked on the Bluestone path. It was just like last year when they walked on the white pebble beach by the blue sea at the frontier fortress. The calm and pure atmosphere surrounded the young man and woman. "Stay away from her," Ninkei suddenly said. Situ Ilan looked up at him and knew that he was referring to the princess. She was puzzled and said, "I don't understand what you mean. What do you want to say?" There were willow branches hanging down from the lake bank and brushing his cheeks. Ninkei was a little annoyed and reached out to pick one. He said, "You were young and could ride with her on the long street and be proud. But if you really want to be a female general of the Tang Empire, you have to understand that it's different from a female army." Situ Ilan thought quietly for a long time and looked up at him. She said, "I want to be a female general of the Tang Empire, not someone else's." Ninkei saw that she understood what he meant and nodded with appreciation. He handed over the grasshopper woven from willow branches and said, "This is your reward." Situ Ilan took the lovely grasshopper and was very happy. She said, "You are really fast." Ninkei picked up another willow branch and said, "When Sang Sang was young and often cried because of hunger, I would find some leaves and weave some gadgets to make her happy. It's faster to make more gadgets." Situ Ilan looked at his expression and said jokingly, "Look at the lake and you will find how annoying you are at this time." Ninkei said proudly, "I am good at it. Why shouldn't I be proud?" Situ Ilan blinked and asked, "Are you proud because of your dexterity, or because you made Sang Sang happy?" Ninkei said both, but the latter is more. Situ Ilan gently coughed and asked with a smile, "During those days people in Chang and city have been talking about you and the calligraphy addict. Many people, including Wu Tsai, had seen you holding hands with the calligraphy addict. Why did you get together with your little handmaiden a few days later?" It was already surprising that Sang Sang suddenly became the miss of the Grand Secretary's mansion. This change is even more surprising. Ninkei was stunned and asked, "Can't I?" Situ Ilan raised the willow branch grasshopper in front of her eyes and looked very naughty. She said, "Why not? It's just that many people said you played with the calligraphy addict's feelings. They are very ashamed of you." Ninkei waved his arms and said angrily, "How did I play with her? How did I play with her? I have become like this. What else do you want me to do? Besides, when did I hold hands with her?" He stretched out his arms in the lake wind and protested indignantly, "We did swim together, but where did my arms go? I didn't even touch her hands." The new house by the Yinming Lake was completed. Under Song Song's strong request, Ninkei did not hire stewards or maids, nor did he waste money on any opening ceremony. But since Liu brought Ilan here, Ninkei thought that he had to put on a show. So he returned to the back of the mountain of the academy and invited his senior brothers and sisters to be guests. Just as he had expected, his senior brothers and sisters in the back of the mountain of the academy were not interested in this kind of thing at all. He felt a little relaxed, but also a little embarrassed. Unexpectedly, the next day Chen Pippi came with Tang Xiaotang. Ninkei rowed and rowed the boat. Looking at the fat man lying on the bow, sighing and urging, he felt angry. He thought that it was Sang Sang who rowed on the lake and he enjoyed it. But after he came, he had to serve him. What kind of logic was this? Although he thought so, he could not say it out. Because the academy was most particular about, to be exact, second brother was most particular about brotherhood. Since Chen Pippi was the senior brother, he could naturally ask Ninkei to do things. Even if Ninkei had any opinions about it, he did not have the guts to reason with second brother. "I say, can't you hurry up? Didn't you eat today?" Chen Pippi looked at the boat that was about to disappear into the lotus field and saw Tang Xiaotong's figure on the boat. He was so anxious that he almost jumped and scolded Ninkei through the oar and said angrily, "You ate all the lunch. Where can I go to eat? See you tomorrow." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 443. For people and two boats floating on the lake. It was a beautiful thing. Unfortunately, Tang Xiaotang and Sang Sang were in the same boat, so Chen Pippi had to take the same ticket as Ning Quebec. The boat was faintly discernible in the lotus field. Tang Xiaotang and Sang Sang were happily talking about something with some small things in their hands. Chan Pippi looked ahead and thought that it was such a pity that he couldn't get close to Xiaotang after he saved her from the clutches of his third senior sister. What are they talking about? Chun Pippi asked. Ning Ke said, a few days ago, I made some small things with willow branches for Sang Sang. I haven't made them for many years, but she still likes them very much. She must show them to her friends. Chun Pippi was slightly startled. He looked back at Ning Ke beside the oar and said, I didn't know that you are a guy who knows how to please girls. Ning Ke sneered. Do you think everyone is worse than a beast like you? It's been so many days. Haven't you got the girl yet? Chun Pippi lowered his head in shame and rubbed his hands nervously. He said, Don't talk nonsense. Ning Ke shook his head helplessly and said, I can't tell that you are so thin-skinned just by looking at your fat face. Chun Pippi refuted with a lack of confidence. That's because the girl is thin-skinned. The boat sailed into the depths of the lotus field. The traces left by the iron kettle by the thunder and lightning had long disappeared. The green branches and round leaves covered the sky, which was very quiet. Sang Sang and Tang Xiaotang's boat rode to an unknown place. Ning Ke put down the oar and walked into the canopy. He handed a pot of wine to Chun Pippi and whispered, Have you thought it through? Chun Pippi took the wine pot and carefully took a sip. Then he frowned because of the spiciness. After a long silence he said, How can I think about this kind of thing? But you should know who you are. Ning Ke said calmly, Although you still refuse to tell me, and I still don't know whether you are the son of the hierarch lord or the abbey dean, you are the pride and future of Haotian Taoism. Although the headmaster has raised you for so many years, you will eventually go back. Chun Pippi looked at the lotus field outside the boat and said blankly, Probably. Ning Ke said, Tang Xiaotang is from the devil's doctrine. Chun Pippi said in a low voice, Then what do you think we should do? Do your own things and think for yourself. Ning Ke said, I'm just reminding you that if you really want to return to Haotian Taoism, neither the West Hill Divine Palace nor the Jishou Abbey will allow you to marry Tang Xiaotang. Chun Pippi looked up at him and asked, Why did you choose Sang Sang instead of the calligraphy addict? That is a different kind of pain from what you are facing now. Ning Ke said bluntly, No matter what I choose, I will at most be laughed at and despised by others, or hurt the girl. But if you make the wrong choice, or if your determination is not strong enough, you will definitely face more than these, and Tang Xiaotang will be even more miserable. Chun Pippi frowned again. His round face, which was usually carefree and cheerful, showed a rare solemn expression, which eventually turned into endless sorrow. It's going to rain. He frowned and drank all the liquor in the pot as if he was drinking poison. He said with a lisp, I'll take her back to the academy first. Ning Ke stuck his head out of the canopy and saw the clear blue sky above the lotus field. There were no clouds in the sky, and it did not look like it was going to rain. Chun Pippi stroked his chest and said faintly, It's raining here. It's all your fault. It's rare for you to come out and play, but you have to mention these things that make people feel bad. The sky was clear and there was no rain. Chun Pippi, a fat young man who had always been optimistic, felt a cold rain falling in his heart. Gradually his heart felt like it was going to be moldy. Ning Ke sympathized with his senior brother very much. After sending him and Tang Xiaotang off, he sat by the window of the study and could not help but feel sad when he thought of what Chun Pippi had said on the boat. At this moment a wind blew from the south bank of Yanming Lake, rustling the lotus leaves in the lake and ruffling the long willows on the lake bank. The wind went around the thick trunk of the ancient tree and poured into the study. Sang Sang sat in the chair, holding a cup of herbal tea in her hand. She squinted at the lake wind that came from outside the window and said, It looks like it's really going to rain. As soon as the little handmaiden finished her words, the sound of rain suddenly sounded. The pitter-patter of rain fell from the sky, slowly and firmly washing away the summer heat in the woods of the house. It did not take long for the courtyard to be completely wet. I didn't expect it to really rain. Ning Ke took the cup of tea from her hand and drank it, moistening his throat that was a little dry because of worrying about his friend. Then he looked at the empty cup and asked, What did Tang Xiaotang say? Sang Sang hugged her thin legs and put her chin on her knees. She seriously recalled the conversation on the boat in the depths of the lotus field and said. Tang Tang said that she was a little muddle-headed. Ningke was slightly stunned and asked, "That's it?" Sang Sang said. She said that she had to ask her brother's opinion on this matter. Ningke thought of the powerhouse from the Devil's Doctrine who wore a leather coat and was as terrifying as a rock. He suddenly felt that the lake wind outside the window was a little cold and suddenly felt more sympathy for Chan Pippi. The rain in the courtyard became heavier and heavier, and the summer heat was quickly washed away. The rainwater on the lawn also accumulated more and more, converging into several thin streams that flowed towards Yanming Lake. Thousands of rivers flow into the sea, it's natural, Ningke said with emotion. Sang Sang raised her head and gave him a puzzled look, not understanding what he was talking about. What I want to say is that there are some things that we can only passively worry about, but we can't do anything about it. We can only silently watch it develop, and at most give our blessings. Ningke looked at the heavy rain outside the window and said, "It's like the sky is going to rain, and the young lady is going to get married." Sang Sang thought about it and hugged her legs tighter. There was silence in the courtyard. There was no sound, only the sound of rain. At this moment there was a sudden loud knock on the front door of the house. "I told you to say it's going to rain, and now it's really going to rain. Did you not bring an umbrella? This is a guest from Haotian. You two can sleep here tonight, but don't expect me to lend you an umbrella. Sang Sang and I have set a strict rule since we were young. We can borrow people and lives, but we can't borrow two things. You can't borrow money, and you can't borrow an umbrella." The knocking in the front yard became louder and more urgent. It was obvious that the guy was not happy with the heavy rain, and he wanted to express his strong dissatisfaction by knocking. Ningke was too lazy to care. He still imitated the eldest brother and walked slowly to the door, and kept nagging to make fun of the guy. "You want to say why you can't borrow an umbrella? Hey, this is a very long story, and I don't know if you are interested to hear it. You shouldn't have left just now. Oh my God, why is it you?" Ningke's voice stopped abruptly when he pushed open the courtyard door. He looked outside with his mouth open, and his hands were still holding the heavy courtyard door. He was so stiff that he looked like he had been struck by lightning. He really felt like he had been struck by lightning at this time. It was not Chan Pippi and Tang shouting outside the house. It was a young Taoist girl in a blue Taoist robe. The young Taoist girl was soaked by the heavy rain. Her wide blue Taoist robe was wet, and her messy and sticky hair was on her forehead. She looked very embarrassed. She was holding a horsetail whisk in her hand, and the tail of the whisk was on her left arm, dripping water. No matter how one looked at it, being drenched was a very embarrassing scene. Therefore, the girl's eyes were no longer as cold and proud as before, but with a bit of anger and shame. But in fact, she did not look embarrassed at all. Her eyebrows were still so beautiful. No matter how the rain fell on her pale cheeks, no matter how angry her eyes were, she was still beautiful. Because she was recognized as one of the 3 most beautiful girls in the world. Ningke pushed open the courtyard door and saw a beautiful girl in the heavy rain. Her cheeks were pale, and her hair was slightly messy. She looked timid and pitiful. Ningke suddenly thought of many beautiful stories and strange stories, and then remembered a song that kept repeating, "You are so beautiful." Ningke believed that the beautiful Taoist girl outside the door was definitely more powerful than those vixens in strange stories. He also believed that she was more beautiful than those vixens. But he was not tempted, because he did not want to court death. He did not even want to see her at all. Even though his cultivation state was much stronger now, he still did not want to see her. Therefore, his first reaction was to close the door. However, just as he was about to close the 2 heavy courtyard doors with all his strength, he found that the doors were many times heavier than before. Because the Taoist girl in the rain stretched out a palm and placed it in the gap of the door. Ningke did not dare to think about how much blood he would lose under her Taoist sword if he clamped her hand and made it bleed. But he still did not stop closing the door. Just as the 2 heavy courtyard doors were about to clamp the Taoist girl's palm, a faint light suddenly appeared on the tiny hand that was dripping with rainwater. There was a sudden gust of wind at the courtyard door, and the heavy rain falling on the courtyard from the air suddenly stopped. An indifferent and powerful aura gushed out from that palm, instantly evaporating the rainwater and an extremely small green leaf on the surface of the palm. Then it shattered everything it touched. There was a dull and loud sound at the courtyard door. The people in the distant Chang and city who were sheltering from the rain under the eaves looked curiously at the Yanming Lake where the sound came from. They wondered if the loud thunder had killed anyone. No one died, but the 2 doors were destroyed. Ning Ke looked at the big gap in the courtyard door and wanted to cry but had no tears. The splinters of the courtyard door splashed all over his body, and even his face was covered with splinters. He looked very pitiful under the washing of the rain. Looking at the fresh fragrant wood stubble gradually turning from white to gray in the rain, he thought of the money he had spent on the 2 courtyard doors. His expression became extremely painful. He looked up at the beautiful Taoist girl in the rain and trembled with heartache. He shouted angrily, "Yihongyu, you must pay for my door." Consecutive 2-word chapter names. That's the end of it. Today's chapter names made me exhale deeply and feel extremely good. Today is Friday. I will accompany my parents to drink and play. So there is only 1 chapter left. I will write some more. There will be updates tomorrow and Saturday, because I asked for leave a few days ago. I will make up for it tomorrow. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 444. The young Taoist priest in the rain was naturally Yi Hongyu. That night, after cutting open Chan Bachi's eyes with a piece of thin paper, she left the Peach Mountain in indigo clothes and left the West Hill under the cover of the night. After a long journey to Chang and a heavy rain, she became even more exhausted and haggard. When she heard Ning Ke's question, she could not help but say angrily, "What can I do if I don't compensate you?" Looking at the indifference and anger in her eyes, Ning Ke did not dare to do anything to her. After all, this beautiful female Taoist priest in front of him was the person he feared the most in the cultivation world. He brushed off the sawdust on his face and said in a distressed tone, "If you don't want to pay, then don't. Why are you so serious?" Yi Hongyu pulled him away from the door and barged into the courtyard. She said, "Find me a room. I want to stay." Ning Ke looked at the young Taoist priest walking into the deep courtyard and was stunned for a while before he finally came to his senses. He hurried to catch up with her and asked with a bitter face, "Why did you come to Chang'an? Why did you come to Chang'an? How did you know I lived here? Are you looking for a place to stay? How long do you plan to stay?" In the corridor, Yi Hongyu suddenly stopped and said, "I need some time to think about some questions." Ning Ke asked, "What? How long do you need to think?" Yi Hongyu reached out to pull the hair that was dripping from her forehead and said, "It shouldn't be too short." Ning Ke looked at the beautiful girl in front of him and said nervously, "You are the West Hill Tao addict. There are many people in the world who want to flatter you. You can think of anywhere in the world. I guess you know the way to the Revelation Institute, the Lang Temple and the Jishou Abbey. Why do you have to come to Chang'an? Do you really have to do it in my house?" Yi Hongyu said, "Because Chang'an is the only place in the world that the Divine Hall cannot enter." Ning Ke gasped. He looked at her and asked in a trembling voice, "You betrayed us too?" Yi Hongyu frowned slightly and said, "Why did you use the word also?" Ning Ke said, "The great divine priest of light also lived in Chang, and for half a year last year." Yi Hongyu was silent and did not answer him. She turned and continued to walk to the end of the corridor. Her steps were steady and calm, leaving a trail of water in the corridor. Ning Ke quickly followed her and shouted angrily, "Even if you didn't betray us, you must have offended some bigwigs in the Divine Hall. Then why should I offend those bigwigs in the Divine Hall? Even you have offended them and had to run away from home to avoid trouble?" Yi Hongyu continued to walk along the winding corridor in the courtyard. She looked at the forest outside the corridor in the rain and said calmly, "I said in the wilderness that I would kill you." Yi Hongyu said, The arrow you shot at Longqing on the snow cliff will be cancelled. What do you think? Yi Hongyu said, yes, you can celebrate. Now that I've said that I won't try to kill you, you can start celebrating. The premise of this sentence is that she can kill you if she says she wants to. It was a simple sentence, but it contained a lot of pride, confidence, and even narcissism. Ning Ke was also a narcissistic person, but he had to put away all his narcissism when he was with the Tao addict because he knew how terrible she was. At this time, hearing that she didn't try to kill him, although he was happy, he also felt a little humiliated. Suddenly, he raised his eyebrows and asked tentatively, "Are you hurt?" Yi Hongyu did not hide it from him and said directly, "I haven't recovered from my injuries in the wilderness." The seemingly silent but extremely dangerous battle with Master Lotus at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine would often appear in Ning Ke's mind. He was very clear about how important the Tao addict was in that battle and how serious her injuries were. However, he did not expect it to last until now. No wonder I feel that your state of cultivation seems to be much weaker. When I opened the courtyard door just now, I saw you drenched like a stray puppy in the rain. It was very pitiful. I was wondering why I felt that you were pitiful. Ning Ke looked at the girl's pale cheeks and thought of the past when they fought side by side in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. He felt a little emotional, but after a moment, he forced himself to calm down and said in a low voice, "But since you are so weak now, I don't think I have enough bargaining chips. What's in it for me to take you in?" They had reached the end of the 9-turn corridor. If they went further, they would be in the flower hall and the study. Yi Hongyu stopped and turned to look at Ning Quebec. She said calmly, "If you think that my conditions are not enough, why don't we fight again?" Ning Ke looked at her eyes that were like autumn water for a long time. He wanted to see a trace of uncertainty in the depths of her eyes, but he did not see it. If he could see a trace of uncertainty in the Tao addict's eyes, he would attack without any scruples, hesitation, or pity, just like when he shot Longqing by the Daming Lake. Because he was a cold-blooded and heartless person. He knew very well that the Tao addict was a rare person in the cultivation world, who was as cold-blooded and heartless as himself. If there was a chance, no one would be willing to let the other go. Regrettably, Ning Ke saw tiredness, haggard, and even lost and perplexed in the girl's eyes, but he did not see her uncertainty about him. So Ning Ke shook his head and said with a smile, "You must be joking." Yi Hongyu looked into his eyes and said seriously, "You know I am not joking." Ning Ke was sure that Yi Hongyu's cultivation had been greatly damaged after she had forcefully lowered her state at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. He had reached the upper state of the see-through state after he had cultivated in seclusion in the cliff cave. In terms of cultivation, he was already above Yi Hongyu, but he was still not sure that he could defeat her. He did not know the tragic experience of Chun Bachi, the commander of the upper state of the see-through state. He was just like the beasts in Min Mountain who felt the danger. So he continued to smile and shake his head. Then, like a very enthusiastic host, he stretched out his arm and led Yi Hongyu out of the corridor and into the main hall. Sang Sang stood at the threshold and watched him walk in with a drenched Taoist girl. Her face was full of curiosity and she asked, "Do you want to boil the bath water? Don't panic. Let me introduce you to the guests first." Ning Ke coughed twice and calmed himself down. He pointed at Yi Hongyu and said, "Don't be fooled by her messy appearance. In fact, she is a very great person. She is the powerful Tao addict who kills without blinking an eye that I often mention to you." Yi Hongyu said, "You still mention me often after returning to Chang'an?" Ning Ke answered honestly, "If I want to kill you, I will naturally talk about you often." Yi Hongyu nodded and said, "That makes sense." Ning Ke looked at the vigilant expression on Song Song's face and said with a smile, "She is indeed very scary. But only I need to be afraid. You don't have to be afraid because she is your senior sister." Then, he walked to Song Song's side and put his arm around her shoulder. He said to Yi Hongyu, "My Sang Sang." Yi Hongyu felt that this petite handmaiden did not match the image of Sang Sang that she had imagined. But she did not show any expression of surprise. She calmed herself down and gently shook her horsetail whisk to greet junior sister Sang Sang. At this time she was still wet. Rainwater dripped down her temples and horsetail whisk. The drenched Taoist robe clung to her curvy body, exuding a charming and seductive aura. but her expression was so calm and composed, like a dignified Taoist. Sang Sang was a little flustered. She half squatted down and slightly bowed to return the greeting. Then she stood up and looked at Yi Hongyu's beautiful face and seductive curves under the wet clothes. She could not help but sigh softly, full of envy and yearning. Ningke was much calmer than before. He finally noticed that the Tao addict's green Taoist robe clung to her body. His eyes became brighter and full of envy. Yi Hongyu looked at them expressionlessly and asked, "Do I look good?" The master and the handmaiden nodded and praised, "Yes, you look good." Hearing this answer and looking at the two's confident expressions, Yi Hongyu could no longer maintain her cold expression like that of a glacier goddess. She took a deep breath and said, "I will go take a shower first, and then I will let you look to your heart's content." In the night, the pitter-patter of rain came from outside the window. Ningke opened his eyes and looked at the carved ceiling on the bed. He had no intention of falling asleep. He said, "If she really wants to stay here, it will be very troublesome." Sang Sang slept on the other side of the bed. When she heard this, she lifted the thin veil and leaned against the headboard. She said very seriously, "Yes, it seems that we really need to hire a maid." Ningke naturally would not allow Sang Sang to serve others. He said, "We definitely need to hire a maid, but it is not troublesome. The trouble I am talking about is more troublesome." Sang Sang asked curiously, "What kind of trouble is that?" Ningke thought of the murderous figure in red that flitted across the forest under the snow cliff in the depths of the wilderness. He thought of the divine light above the Daming Lake and the bloody mess in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. He felt a strong chill even on this rainy summer night. His body suddenly became colder and colder. He had encountered many dangers in his life. After returning to Chang, and from the city of Wei and entering the world of cultivators, he had also encountered many dangers. But the one who really made him feel the shadow of death was the Tao addict Yi Hongyu. In the cultivation world, he had seen many powerhouses with profound states. Yi Hongyu was definitely not the strongest among them, but she gave him the feeling that she was the most dangerous. Because Yi Hongyu had a firm Taoist heart and was as ruthless as him. She really understood what it meant to fight and understand life and death. What happened in the West Hill Divine Palace that made Yi Hongyu flee in the night and resolutely seek refuge in Cha? And despite the hostility between the West Hill and the Tang Empire, there were not many bigwigs in the Divine Hall who could make the Tao addict so embarrassed. Was it the great Divine Priest of Judgment or the Hierarch Lord? Ningke was very clear that if this matter was not handled well, it would really be a big trouble. Sang Sang said worriedly, "Then how can we solve this trouble? If Yi Hongyu can't solve the trouble, I naturally can't solve it either. But fortunately, I know many people who can solve the trouble of the West Hill Divine Palace." Ningke said, "I will hand this trouble over tomorrow." Nothing happened that night, but the two did not sleep well. Especially Ningke. Thinking of such a dangerous person as Yi Hongyu sleeping in a guest room dozens of feet away, he felt nervous and uneasy. He did not fall asleep until the early hours of the morning. When he woke up, the summer rain had stopped and the sky was already bright. He hastily washed up and quietly left Yanming Lake with Sang Sang. They took a horse carriage to the academy. There will be more today, but the time is uncertain. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.